Hear us? No. Hello, Jamie. Do you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Perfect. So it's working. Thank you.
Hi, Jamie. Can you hear us?
Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So if you have any problem during the presentation, just text me. Okay. As we said.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Is that a Western States belt buckle there, Guy?
Yes, it is.
Big flex into the camera. I like it.
No, not Western States. It's another trail in Canada, but not Western States.
Very cool.
Okay. See you in a bit.
Ok, buenos días, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome. Je serai le président de ce jury et l'intégralité de la soutenance va se tenir en anglais. Donc je vais faire la présentation des choses en anglais. Welcome everybody. We are here to listen to Fred Sabater's defense. And the member of the jury will be as follows. We will start with the comments of Fabrice Wilkerson, Dr. Fabrice Wilkerson from the University of Toulon. Then Dr. Grégory Doussand from the University of Perpignan. Then we will hear the comments of the two reporters. First one will be Dr. Jamie Burr from University of Guelph, Canada. Jamie is online. Then we will have Dr. Caroline Nicole from the Aix-Marseille Université, and myself, Jean-Benoît Morin, from the University of Saint-Etienne. And we will have a conclusion word from the supervisor, Guillaume Millet. So Guillaume Millet from the University of Saint-Etienne. Fred, we are listening to you.
Okay, so thank you very much to all of you for coming to my presentation. As GB said, I am Frederic Sabater Pastor, and I am here today to present the results of my thesis, which was entitled Performance Factors of Prolonged Running, with a particular focus on running economy and fatigue. And this thesis was done under the supervision of Professor Guillaume Millet. So this is what I will talk about today. I will start with an introduction in which I will talk about the model that we're using, endurance running, and especially trail running. And then in a second part, I will talk about performance factors in trail running, which will include the first two studies of my thesis. Then a third part on prolonged exercise and cost of locomotion, which will include another two studies. And then finally, it will be the general discussion and the perspectives. So starting with the first part in the introduction, we have to define the main exercise type that we're using, which was trail running. And what is trail running? So trail running, as it is defined by the International Trail Running Association, is a pedestrian competition which is completed in a natural environment. So in nature, the mountains, forest can be anywhere, but with road sections that are a total of less than 20% of the total distance of the race. In the last years, between 2015 to 2019, the ITRA reported an increase in participation, reaching more than 1 million participants in trail running races every year. And also this will be used at sometimes during the thesis. The ITRA divides the races in different categories according to kilometer effort. Kilometer effort taking into account both the horizontal distance that is run, but also the vertical distance that is climbed. And most of the results, most of the participants are in the races of the S and M category, that is between 45 to 114 kilometer effort. So I already talked a bit about the specificities of trail running, but the main thing that I want to talk about here is the characteristics of trail running when compared to road running, which has been much more extensively studied. So you can see here the profile of a road marathon. This is the New York City Marathon, which is one of the world marathon majors, the 6 most important marathons in the world, or at least the ones that give most money to the winners. And it's actually one of the hillier ones. So this is a typical trail marathon. It's the Marathon of Segama, and it has 2,700 meters of vertical gain and then loss. So this climbing and then descending will have specific consequences because the runners have to cover all of that vertical distance, which will have increased, for example, concentric demands during the uphill or eccentric demands during the downhills. These differences in the profiles of trail running races also affect how the races are run in terms of the distribution of the intensity. So with the same two races, this will be data from two people that finished fourth in the races, which is their heart rate data. And in a road marathon, it is relatively steady all the time, constant with a narrow band of heart rate, whereas in the trail marathon, the heart rate is much more stochastic, jumps much more up and down, and there's a wider band of heart rates. So basically, this means that there is more variability in the trail running races, which can be caused by either the differences in elevation gain or differences in the microterrain, maybe like small steps and obstacles. So to talk about those, one other difference between the road and trail running races is the terrain in which they are run and the environment in which they are run, things that go beyond just the elevation gain. So sometimes they are run on technical trails that are very rocky, so it's not just like running on a straight line, even to the point that sometimes it requires scrambling with the use of the hands. There are often obstacles, such as river crossings, parts in which you have to run through sand or really muddy terrain, and sometimes even snow when the races happen either in winter or in high altitude in the mountains. And then because of this, high altitude is another of the aspects that may be more relevant in trail running races compared to road running races. So because of all of these differences, the equipment that is used will be different. So in road running, it's usually runners, they have shoes, shorts, a t-shirt, or a singlet, and that's it. However, in road running, they carry much more stuff. You can see here poles, a backpack. If you are wondering what is inside that backpack, these are pictures from mandatory equipment that the races require the athletes to run in several different races. So runners have to carry all of that and also know how to use it. Specifically for the shoes, for example, these are typical road running shoes, lightweight for racing, and these are typical trail running long distance shoes. So as you can see, huge differences in weight. And this is caused because the trail running shoes are more protected and also have better grip in the outsoles for the specific terrain. So because of all of these differences between the two disciplines, we wonder what are going to be the specific factors that will determine performance in trail running. Are they going to be the same as in road running, or will they be different? So we'll take a look at the research on that. But before that, we will look at the effect of the intensity in the trail running races. So this is well known. These are world records for men and women in road marathons. And what we see is that speed between the 800 meters and 24 hours, speed decreases as distance increases. Nothing new here. What we see is that this is the same in terms of trail running. There is a decrease in speed as distance increases. And we also see that whereas in the official road races, there are few things, this is the marathon, there are few races beyond the marathon. It is very common to have races beyond 5 hours in trail running. Therefore, longer races, they may lead us to, in general, lower intensities. And this might affect the determinants of performance. Looking at intensity more closely, if we use this model that actually we already showed this morning, so 3 different training zones or 3 different intensity zones divided by the first ventilatory threshold or lactate threshold, second ventilatory threshold or the lactate turn point, and then they would demarcate the different zones. So zone 1 would be up to the first one, zone 2 would be between the 2 thresholds, and zone 3 above the second threshold and up to VO2 max. So if we look at the previous research that has reported the data on heart rate distribution in different races, it shows this, that as the race distance category increases, there is a decrease in the time spent at high intensity in zone 3, and an increase in time spent at low intensity in zone 1. So maybe what happens is that if the race is run at a different intensity, the determinants of performance for each of these distance categories might be different. For example, in this race, you're spending more time close to VO2 max. Therefore, VO2 max, we could suspect it to be more important in the shorter races than the longer races. So when we look at the previous research on physiological determinants of performance, in road running, it is very clear. Like there is a classical model that has been published and known for like now at least 30 years, if not more, probably more, in which VO2 max and the percentage of VO2 max at the lactate turn point give you the performance VO2 or the VO2 at the lactate turn point, depending on how they express it. And those things are combined with running economy, which in the end leads to performance. So basically, performance speed is very much dependent on this. Up to like some studies have shown 95% of these together predicts 95% of the variance in performance. However, in trail running, have all of these factors that we talked about previously. And a previous study done by Erstrom et al. Showed that using the classical model of performance, so VO2 max, the ventilatory threshold, and running economy on the flat, explain only 48% of the variance in performance. However, when they used a model they considered to be more specific for trail running, in which they not only consider VO2 max, but they consider local muscle endurance of the knee extensor muscles, and also running economy uphill, so at 10% incline, they predicted, like they found that this model predicted 98% of the variance in performance, and this was in a short race, 27 kilometers. So one of the factors of performance that I will talk about most during this thesis presentation, because it's one that I worked on a lot, is running economy. So I will go into more detail explaining it. Running economy is basically the amount of, like, represents the amount of energy that the runner uses to run a given task or given distance at a given speed. It can be expressed in different ways, but here, to put it simply, we have two runners, runner A and runner B. So runner A at the top, to run at any given distance, has to use more oxygen. Therefore, if both runners have the same VO2 max, for example, here, we will have that runner A, because he uses more oxygen at any given speed, at VO2 max will reach 21 kilometers per hour, whereas runner B, because he uses less energy at any given, less VO2 at any given speed, he will reach a greater speed at VO2 max. So going into the details on how running economy is measured or assessed, we see that this study by Fletcher et al. In 2009 showed that when running economy is measured as the oxygen cost of running, there is no difference depending on the speed. So this is the speed compared to the lactate turn point speed. So 1 kilometer per hour less, 3 kilometers per hour less. So there is no difference in oxygen cost with increasing speed. However, when we look at it as energy cost, so converting the oxygen to energy cost as caloric cost, or it could be measured in kilojoules, there is actually an increase on the energy cost of running with increasing speed. Another factor that will affect beyond the speed, the cost of running, is the gradient of the slope. So due to gravity, as slope increases, it requires to move the body mass upwards as well. So the cost of running increases with uphill running. However, with downhill running, it decreases out to about 20% gradient, and then it starts increasing again at more inclined slopes. In this thesis, we will only talk about running economy measured in this range here, between 0% and 15% incline. And due to what I said previously, that energy cost is better than oxygen, instead of talking about running economy, I will specifically call it cost of running during the rest of the presentation. So because cost of running is important, we wonder what are the different factors that may affect cost of running. And several factors have been proposed, like they may all be affected by genetics, and they may be related to metabolic efficiency, cardiorespiratory efficiency, training factors, biomechanical efficiency, and neuromuscular efficiency. And those might be related to each other to, in the end, give us what is the running economy or cost of running. Another factor that has been important recently in the literature is the equipment, especially shoes. And especially this is because in the last maybe 5 years, companies such as Nike have been making shoes with the specific goal of reducing cost of running and therefore improving performance. So one thing that happens then is that with those mechanisms, in the same way that they all affect performance, some of them at least, they could change during a running task. So for example, during a given running task, there could be an increase or change, at least in ventilation or heart rate. There could be changes in neuromuscular fatigue, in muscle stiffness or tendon stiffness, changes in muscle metabolism. There could be changes in external factors, such as changing the temperature or the weather conditions. And there could be changes that were biomechanical changes, such as step frequency and step length, the duty factor, the stiffness of the limbs, and then also changes in body mass or the load that is carried, especially in trail running. So all of these are factors that could change and therefore affect the changes in running economy. So with all of this background, I will go into what were the main objectives of my thesis. The general main goal was to get a better understanding of endurance running and then its consequences. We used mostly trail running for this. So the first part focused on performance in trail running, which included 2 studies. The first one was performance factors in trail runners versus road elite runners. And the second study looked at performance factors in trail running, especially looking at the effect of distance of the race. Then the second part looked at the consequences of fatigue on cost of running. So this was about changes in cost of running following the trail running races done in the same event and looking at the effect of distance. And then changes in cost of locomotion following endurance exercise and looking at exercise, at the effect of exercise modality. This is what I call it here, cost of locomotion, because we were comparing 2 different exercise modalities. So it was cost of running and cost of cycling. So we'll go into study 1. which is the one on performance factors in trail versus elite runners, versus road elite runners. So this study, the aim was taking into account all the differences that there are between the two modalities, road and trail running. Are there specific differences between elite runners who are successful in the two different sports, who they are successful in each of the sports, but they are not usually successful in both sports at the same time? So we wanted to test for differences, and we tested for them in terms of strength, power, running economy, biomechanics, and also training through a questionnaire. And we had the hypothesis that in terms of strength and power, trail runners would be more powerful. In terms of cost of running, that trail runners will have lower cost of running when running uphill, and then road runners will have lower cost of running when running on the flat. And this was because they would be specific for each modality. And this study has been submitted to the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So the methods that we followed was that we recruited the participants. They were all elite runners, 7 road runners, 10 trail runners. The trail runners, the 10 trail runners included the 4 runners that were that year, in the same season that we tested them, world champions in trail running. The 7 road runners, they were also very high level. They were the best in France, but they were not such a high level in their sport. They were not the ones who won. For example, the best runner, the one that got the best results, was 12th in the Olympic marathon. So what did we do? We followed the runners to their training camps in different places, in a couple different places in France, in the region of Cantal, and then to Portugal. This meant that we spent a lot of time driving a van. And then there we gave them a training questionnaire. Following that, we did a cost of running test with biomechanics test, which was assessed with an optojump. And we did that in 3 different conditions: 10 kilometers per hour on the flat, 14 kilometers per hour flat, and 10 kilometers per hour at 10% uphill. Then we did some neuromuscular testing, measuring maximal isometric force, so of the knee extensors and then the knee flexors. And finally, we did a force velocity profile assessment with 2 tests, with 2 sprint tests on a cycloergometer. So results, what did we find? We found that there were no differences in knee extensor or knee flexor maximal isometric strength between groups. So as you can see here, none of the differences were significant. However, when we assessed these differences in a dynamic condition with the force velocity profile, we found that when assessed related to body mass, there was a change, a difference in F0 with trail runners being stronger, and the difference in power, in maximal power, was not significant. However, both F0 and maximal power were significant when measured in absolute terms and not divided by body mass. So why were they stronger? This is a bit of a chicken or egg problem. It could be that they were stronger because they did more natural resistance training due to their normal training with all the uphill and downhill, or it could also be that they were good at trail running and they were selected to be good trail runners because they were already stronger. So this is, both things could be, but we think that it is likely that their training contributed to this, because we know that, for example, the eccentric training contributes to increasing strength. In terms of cost of running, we found that there were no differences, no significant differences when running on the flat at 10 kilometers per hour. That trail runners had greater cost of running at 14 kilometers per hour on the flat. And then during uphill running, there were no differences, which went against our hypothesis. We were wondering why this might be, and one possible option is that the 10 kilometers per hour was too slow to show any differences here. And we were wondering what would have happened if we had given slopes of like greater slopes, such as what Gregory was saying this morning, maybe up to 25, 30, 40%. Maybe then it would have changed. Also, what would have happened if we were walking, but we were limited by our treadmill during this testing. In terms of biomechanics, we thought that maybe the fact that trail runners tend to train at slower speeds in softer terrains and at greater inclines, all of those things will produce biomechanical changes such as increased contact times. So we tried to see if those actually led to any changes when running them on the treadmill. So we assessed changes in flight time, contact time, step frequency, duty factor, leg stiffness, or vertical stiffness, but we found that there were no significant differences between groups in any of those conditions for any of those variables. And then finally, this was a somewhat unexpected result that we got from the training questionnaires. We had them fill questionnaires reporting how much they trained, and we found that trail runners spend less time doing all types of training than road runners. So you can see it here for resistance training, running training, total endurance training, or total training. So all of them together, trail runners did less training. There are several options for why this might be. We don't know exactly. One is that maybe the trail runners have less time available for training just because they were not professional runners, even if they were world champions, whereas the road runners were often at least paid to train and compete. And another option is that the level of the sport in trail running may be lower. That is, that maybe being world champion in trail running requires less physiological capacity, like you don't need to be as good an athlete or than in road running, which is a much more popular sport, let's call it. So in conclusion, from study 1, we found that comparing road to trail runners in terms of power and strength, trail runners had specific neuromuscular function or adaptations compared to road runners, which made them stronger. So of cost of running, we found that trail runners had greater cost of running during level running at high speed, that was at 14 kilometers per hour, but not lower cost of running during uphill running, which was what we expected. So why this might be the difference in cost of running? Why are the road runners better? And one possibility is that they do more training, both strength training and running training, and those have been shown in the literature to improve running economy. So in terms of practical applications, what can we get from this? One is that maybe trail runners will benefit from more running training, or because they don't train as much as elite road runners. And the other one, that specific evaluations in terms of the incline may be necessary to actually assess and see differences in cost of running in trail runners, especially when compared to road runners. So going into the second study, the one about performance determinants, performance factors in trail running, looking at the effect of distance. So we have here the classical model of performance in road running. However, when we go, this was published by Guillaume in ultramarathon performance, but lots of trail running races go beyond the marathon distance, so it may apply. And there are many other factors that affect it. So we still find the same 3 factors here. So we have VO2 max, running and walking energy cost, and low intensity endurance, which would be the equivalent to this one. But there are many other factors that may affect performance, such as gastrointestinal disorders, muscle damage, equipment, psychological and motivational factors. Those still have an effect in shorter distances, but the effect might be much greater in ultramarathons. So there was a recent review by DeWaal that reviewed 7 studies that in races of durations between 40 minutes and 12 hours. And they showed that the factors that affect performance are VO2 max and factors related to VO2 max. They are related to performance. They correlate with performance in most of the studies in which they have been assessed. Factors such as the lactate threshold, ventilatory threshold, whatever way they measured it, were also related to performance. However, running economy in the 3 studies that was assessed did not correlate with performance. Then specific literature that has compared races of different distances in similar conditions is very scarce. As far as I know, there are 2 studies. One by Coates et al., published in 2020. They showed that in these physiological factors, performance in races of 50 and 80 kilometers was predicted by peak velocity on a treadmill test. And there were no predictors for the 160-kilometer race. Another study by Gatter et al. Showed that VO2 max and the thresholds were associated with a 67-kilometer race performance, but not with a 120-kilometer race. One caveat in both of these studies is that the number of finishers that were included in this analysis were 8 runners for the 160-kilometer race here and 77 runners in the study by Gatter. So this may not be sample sizes big enough to actually give show correlation in the results. Therefore, the goal of our study was to determine what are the physiological predictors of trail running performance in races of different distances performed in the rain and weather conditions. And this has been accepted for publication in National Journals for Physiology and Performance. So for the methods, there were 75 participants that were recruited in total, but only 54 were able to finish the race. They were in the short, medium, and long races. So there were 5 possible races. We divided in 3 groups for the analysis. Short races, 40 and 55 kilometers, a medium race of 100 kilometers, and long races that were 140 and 170 kilometers. Then we tested the runners twice. Once, 4 to 8 weeks before their race, they came to the Saint-Etienne. We tested body composition, and we also did a test, which included the running economy at 10 kilometers per hour, and an uphill incremental that was done 12% incline. Then they also were familiarized with it here. So this was in Chamonix previous to the UTC, and we did a force velocity profile, and we also maximalized strength testing of the knee extensors and plantar flex. So what did we find out? So VO2 max. VO2 max was related to performance, short and medium race, however, not related to performance. Oh. Is it better now? Okay. Yeah. Rating of it. So then, VO2 max, we found that VO2 max was related to performance, the medium races, but not long race. It's actually the best performance. There were strong correlation, VO2 max and variable mental test. I'm not showing all of them here, like the peak speed in the test or the threshold correlation max. And so there was a correlation between speed and performance in the performance race, but it was only not VO2 max or any of it. In terms of running, then we looked at it, found results were similar to what has been in the previous. So there was no significant relationship between running economy and performance in any of the distance, although maybe it was a trend in the medium race. Well, sorry for the technical problem. Here, better? Yeah. And then, so going back, I will repeat it, that we found no significant relationship between running economy and performance in any of the race distances. And one reason why we think that this may happen is that it is possible that the variability in running economy or the effect of the running economy that is caused by the terrain in trail running races is greater than the, let's call it, physiological variability, which is what we measure on a treadmill. Then we also looked at body composition, and in terms of body composition, we found that performance was related to adiposity, but not BMI, body mass, or total fat-free mass. And this was the case in the short and medium race, but again, not in the long one. And that there was a correlation between body fat percentage and VO2 max, which means that these two things were, it may explain why body fat percentage was related to performance. Then, in terms of lipid metabolism, which we assessed during the running at 10 kilometers per hour, we found that percentage of energy derived from fat at 10 kilometers per hour was related to performance only in the short races, but not in the medium and long races. And one reason that we think this might be the case is that the lower intensity in the longer races may allow for both easier intake of exogenous carbohydrate and maybe at the same time lower glycogen depletion, therefore making fat utilization, like their ability to use fat, less important in the longer races. And then finally, neuromuscular function that we measured at rest we found that there was a relationship between maximal isometric strength of the knee extensors and performance in the short and medium races, but not the long one. And there was also no relationship with these variables with performance and plantar flexor strength. Finally, we also measured the force velocity profile that I'm not showing here, but there was a performance in the short race and the medium race was also related to F0 in the force velocity profile. So then we put all of these variables into a linear model, and to choose which variables we selected to introduce in the model, we decided to use the ones that we consider to be more physiologically robust, such as VO2 max, for example, instead of peak speed, because we consider that VO2 max might be more reliable than the speed that may depend more on the test protocol that is used. And we found that for the short race, VO2 max and percentage of fat utilization at 10 kilometers per hour were the significant or like the predictors of performance, and they predicted about 82% of the variability in performance. Whereas in the medium, they were VO2 max, the strength of the knee extensors, isometric strength, and then body fat percentage. And those predicted up to about 92% of the variability in performance. So what about the long races? The model could not be applied to the long races. And this was because the distribution of performance times did not allow it. The distribution was not normal. And we can see that here, that there was a big concentration of performances on the slow side of the performances. In like this is it is caused by the UTMB long race, the 170 kilometer race. So big cluster of performances in the slower side, whereas there was a much wider distribution. It was empty on the faster side. And therefore the distribution was skewed and we could not apply the model. So in conclusion, in study 2, we found that maximal aerobic capacity was the main predictor of performance for trail running races up to 100 kilometers. And then up to 55 kilometers was also predicted by lipid utilization. And then in 100 kilometers by maximal strength and body fat percentage. In the long races, we think that research in longer races that may be more or less longer than 120 kilometers and longer than 24 hours must be done with greater sample sizes, and which would hopefully lead to broader distribution of performances, so we can apply then the statistical models. And in terms of practical applications, training should aim to improve aerobic capacity and lipid utilization, and also that strength training should probably be included in the programs. So now we'll go into the third part, which is about prolonged exercise and cost of locomotion. So what are the consequences of fatigue on especially cost of running and cost of locomotion? So first of all, we'll look at the effect of race distance. So for previous context, Vernilo here reviewed all of the research to that date, to 2017, that had measured changes in cost of running after an ultramarathon race, so any race longer than a marathon. And they measured it either, they looked at it either if it was expressed as oxygen cost or energy cost, and they found that in general, cost of running tends to increase following a race, which would be sort of expected, that when you fatigue, you are fatigued, and then like you become worse at using energy to produce speed. However, in some specific cases, that there were these 2 studies, so 3 conditions coming out from 2 studies, there was an improvement, a lower cost of running following a 330 kilometer race, always testing during uphill. But it was not the case. It was not significant when testing on the flat. So basically, this makes us think that distance might have an effect and that the slope could also have an effect. So that was the goal of our study, to investigate the effect of trail running race distance on cost of running, changes on cost of running, and then to examine whether the treadmill slope during the test can influence those changes in cost of running. And this has now been published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology. So what we did, it was done during the same study as the previous one, study number 2. So of the finishers, of the 75 people that we recruited and about 54 that finished the race, there were 46 subjects who were able to complete the testing. Then we divided them, in this case, in only 2 groups, short races and long races, so up to 55 kilometers and 100 kilometers or more. And then this is the cost of running test that we did. So 24 to 48 hours before the race, they came, and then we measured cost of running for 2 periods of 4 minutes with 1 minute of rest in between at 0% incline, at 90% of the speed reached during the VO2 max test, which we must remember was at 12% incline. And then at 15% incline at 70% of the speed reached during the VO2 max test. And we repeated those measurements, and it was after they finished the race, the measurements were done about 2 hours post-race. So, in terms of results, you have them here as pre and post, and then flat and uphill cost of running. So you can see here that cost of running did increase after the short races, but not after the long. The changes were not significant here. And also that there was no significant effect in the ANOVA of the slope, so flat compared to uphill. One reason why we think that we might find this difference between short and long is that maybe the intensity of the race is more detrimental than the duration of the race. So we tried to see which could be the causes for this increase, which could be the mechanisms, but we found that changes in ventilation, in cost of breathing, in RER, or in blood lactate concentration would not explain any of the differences. But I will go into some detail on the changes in RER, the respiratory exchange ratio, because what we found was that in the short races, there was a significant decrease in RER, which was also significant in the long races, but the decrease was greater in the short races compared to the long races. We think that this may be linked to glycogen depletion in the short races due to the greater intensity, and maybe this is the reason why fat utilization is more important, or was related to performance in the short races. So then when we looked at the effect of slope, there was no significant effect on the ANOVA, and we found that there was a strong correlation between cost of running measured on the flat versus the uphill, and also that there was a strong correlation in the changes of cost of running between the flat and the uphill. But when we look at it in more detail, we see that this correlation did not follow the line of identity, and that about, for example, a 15% increase in flat cost of running led to about half as much increase in uphill cost of running. So if this difference is twice as big, we're wondering if this could be related to the differences to some of the specificities of level cost of running, such as more important of the stretch shortening cycle as compared to more important of the concentric strength that is used in the uphill cost of running, well, during uphill running. So in conclusion, but I must say that it was not significant, the difference between both of them when measured like this. However, when we're looking at it in terms of percentage change, there was a significant difference between the two conditions, flat versus uphill. So in conclusion, from study 3, following trail running races of different distances, cost of running increased after short races, but not after the long races. There was increased ventilation, or cost of breathing, and changes in substrate oxidation, but they did not explain the increase in cost of running. And the change in uphill cost of running was not significantly different than the change in flat cost. And that was mostly because changes in uphill cost of running were correlated with the changes in flat cost of running. So finally, the fourth study, changes in cost of locomotion following cycling exercise and running exercise. So we wanted to look at the effect of exercise modality. So for background, the cost of locomotion after cycling exercise between 20 and 120 minutes has been shown to increase previously in the literature. So here is an example that shows a decrease in gross efficiency as exercise goes on. The changing cost of locomotion after running has been shown between distances of 3 kilometers and longer than the marathon, as I previously showed. And then that greater intensities, and there's a greater increase in cost of locomotion at greater intensities and greater duration. So for greater efforts, same intensity but more duration means greater change in cost of locomotion. However, there have been no direct comparisons in the literature between running and cycling, two different modalities, with the same subjects and using the same relative intensity. So therefore, this was our goal, to compare the effect of two endurance exercise modalities, cycling and running, at matched duration and intensity on changes of cost of locomotion. And we wanted to be very careful to how we chose the intensity to make sure it was the same. And also then to investigate if the changes in cost of locomotion were related to changes in other physiological variables, which may explain those changes in cost of locomotion. So for this, we recruited 17 male subjects that they were trained in running and cycling. They were either triathletes or runners who performed a lot of running training. There were 2 visits for the VO2 max tests at the beginning, which were done to choose the intensity, which was 105% of the gas exchange threshold or the first ventilatory threshold. And then there were 2 visits for the 3-hour trials that they were like this. There were 3 hours of exercise, and we performed testing at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end. Well, and at the end. And then we calculated cost of locomotion from the energy equivalent of oxygen and RER. So going back to this, to be clear, we did VO2 testing, and also we did maximal strength testing, like isometric testing with a force velocity profile at the beginning and also at the end of the 3 hours. So in terms of results, looking at just the maximal test, there were no differences in VO2 max between running and cycling, as you can see here. However, the gas exchange threshold was relatively lower in cycling as a percentage of VO2 max or as a percentage of the maximal power that they did. So this led to a lower power, lower intensity relative to VO2 max in the cycling trial. But I want to stress that it was the same metabolic power because we chose it specifically to have the same type of metabolic response, choosing it relative to the first threshold. So in terms of results, for cost of locomotion, we found that there was a time effect and a time times modality interaction for cost of running, which we expressed as metabolic power, showing that in cycling, there was an increase in cost of locomotion, but there was no significant increase in running. Then, when we express this divide by body mass, which we did because during running, you must carry your own body mass, and there was some dehydration that we measured the loss of body mass. There was also time effect and a time times modality interaction. This time for running, it was significant. There was a significant increase in cost of locomotion. However, the increase in cost of locomotion in cycling was still greater. One caveat here is that one possibility is that what might actually explain this, besides the fatigue caused by running or cycling, is that cycling testing, not fatiguing with cycling, but testing with cycling, may be more sensitive to changes in cost of locomotion than running testing. So then we looked at the other variables to see if they could explain why those changes were happening. And we saw that there was same effect, but no modality effect for RER, times and modality interaction for lipid oxidation rate, as you can see here, increased in cycling, but not in running. There was, it increased in both, but it was not different at any time point. There were modality and time effects, but no interaction for example, heart rate and ventilation. So they increased in a similar fashion, therefore not explaining the differences, which led us to this. There were no correlations between changes in any of those physiological variables and the measured changes in cost of locomotion. This left us wondering what could be the factors that explain these changes in cost of locomotion. So specifically in cycling, we looked at the effects of fatigue and cadence. So we found that there was a correlation between the change in cost of locomotion and the change in F0 after cycling, as you can see in the blue line, but not after running. That there was a correlation between the changes in cost of locomotion and the changes in cadence. Therefore, like greater changes in cadence, greater increases in cadence led to greater increase in cost of locomotion. And then as well, that there was a correlation between the changes in cadence and the changes in F0. So if F0 decreased, cadence tended to increase. This led us to believe that one possibility is that there was a decrease in force production capacity, as shown by the change in F0, which, since the power was fixed, to maintain the same power, forced an increase in cadence, and this might have led to an increased cost of locomotion, for example, because of the greater internal cost of moving cycling. So in conclusion, from study 4, we found that changes in cost of locomotion with fatigue are discipline dependent. This may be caused maybe by the mode of contraction, the more concentric versus eccentric. That the increase in cost of locomotion is not explained by increases in ventilation or any of the other metabolic variables that we measured. That the increase in cycling cost of locomotion may actually be related to the effect of fatigue and the effect that fatigue has on cadence. So those were the results of my thesis, and I will go into the general discussion and the perspectives. So here I will go at it going study by study, and then seeing from this study, we got this perspective, and this is what we think about it. So first of all, performance factors in trail versus road runners. this make us wonder, the results make us wonder, do elite trail runners really have elite endurance physiology? So we are not sure about this because we think that the level of in the sport may be different. There is a lack of data on performance determinants and then lack of data on training of elite trail runners. So this we have known since at least the 70s, but probably before, but these studies are from the 70s, that people who were record holders in the marathons, Olympic champions in the marathon, or very good track runners, we have known their values of VO2 max and cost of running. They have been published in the literature. This literature is still being published with either case studies or studies looking at different things, but with really elite runners. We keep getting data about elite road and track runners. However, in terms of trail running, there is basically virtually no data in the literature. There is only one case that has been reported, as far as I know, which is this runner, Kilian Jornet, arguably the best runner in the last decade in trail running. We know that he has a very high VO2 max, but we know nothing about his cost of running or his thresholds. There is some data on his training, but this is it. There is no more data on other runners or other elite trail runners. So more data is definitely needed to know more about the physiology of trail runners and what are their training characteristics, and therefore really be able to compare road and trail runners to see if we are, when comparing elite runners in both categories, we're actually looking at this, are they equally elite or they are not exactly elite in trail running. So then from both the first two studies, we had this other perspective. We didn't look at VO2 max on the first study, sadly we couldn't measure it. And then we wonder about what is the effect of VO2 max in the long ultramarathon races, because it was not, we didn't show a relationship between VO2 max and performance. So my point on this is that VO2 max may not limit performance, but it may not determine performance, but it may limit performance. So what do I mean about that? So since I have already said there were no correlations between VO2 max and performance in previous studies, when this was done on long ultramarathon, this is the example from my study. However, Guillaume did a study in 2009 in the UTMB, and this data has not been published, but there is this relationship in that data. This is also a greater sample size, 22 runners, between VO2 max and performance. They found a significant correlation. So what I did on this graph was draw an arbitrary line to express what I think about this, that if I take here, this line that I draw arbitrarily represents the points, like the best performance that you can get, so lower performance is better compared to the winner, for each given VO2 max. So as we can see here, if you have a VO2 max of about 55, this would be the best performance that you could get. So my point here is that it does not determine performance, and it does not just say which is your performance, but it may limit it because you may not be able to run any faster than this unless you have a greater VO2 max. However, due to the fact that ultramarathon running, very long races are very complicated, since Guillaume showed with this graph, you might have things such as gastrointestinal disorders, equipment failures, shoes that give you blisters. You can have muscle damage or an injury. You can have psychological and motivational factors. All of these things may take someone who has the physiological potential to come here, is limited to this, but it will not be shown as a determinant because he will be slowed down and run one of these performances here. Then from the three first studies, they made us consider what is the effect of technicity of the terrain during trail running, especially for the assessment of cost of running. So cost of running in technical terrain may be different than on the treadmill. It may be the reason why cost of running measured on a treadmill is not a good predictor of performance in trail. And also what may happen is that fatigue may not affect treadmill cost of running, but it might affect technical or on a trail cost of running. So as we know, technical ability is important in trail running, and this can be seen by basically just looking at it. Like, it's complicated and you have to have skills such as foot placement or coordination or decision making, like which path am I going to take. And there's already some data showing that these two things may not be the same: running economy on the flat and running economy on technical terrain. So there was this study done on orienteers and track runners. So when they were running on a path, like normal path on asphalt flat, they found no differences in cost of running. However, when they put them to run on a technical trail with difficulty, there was a significantly greater increase in cost of running for the track runners, but not for the orienteers who were used to this type of terrain due to their probably had better technical ability. We also looked at this then from the perspective of using the data of this study that I collaborated on during my PhD. So in this case, we made runners run on 2 different trails and also on an equivalent elevation profile on the treadmill. So we found that trail A compared to trail B, there was a relationship in cost of running, and it was similar for the treadmill equivalent. So running on a treadmill and running on the treadmill, there was a relationship between cost of running on both. However, when measuring cost of running on the treadmill versus cost of running on the treadmill, treadmill versus trail, there was no relationship. All of this leads us to believe that they may be 2 different things that at least may need to be assessed separately, cost of running on the trail and on the treadmill. Furthermore, this was all done at rest, but we don't know how this might be affected by fatigue after a race. Finally, for the last perspective is about the assessment of fatigue. So usually fatigue is assessed as neuromuscular fatigue. And then there is also this thing about that we studied what was the effect of endurance exercise on performance factors. In this case was cost of running, but what about other factors beyond cost of running? So are there effects on VO2 max, on metabolic thresholds? We don't know that. And we don't know what are the factors that might influence the changes in those physiological determinants of performance. So here are some things that may change with fatigue: VO2 max, thresholds, the technical ability. And this might be affected by several different things that we don't know about: exercise modality, exercise intensity, training status, other factors. So just to show one example, at the end of the 3 hours in study 4, we repeated the incremental test. And we found that compared to in the bike, there was no significant difference in VO2 max from pre to post. However, on the run, there was a significant decrease of VO2 max in the test performed after 3 hours of exercise. So we think that these changes must, first of all, be known and evaluated, and then they must be considered when we want to evaluate the effects of fatigue or fatigability in a performance-relevant context. So looking at things beyond neuromuscular fatigue or just cost of running. So as a summary of the results of my thesis from the first study, we found that trail runners are stronger, but they have greater cost of runner at greater speeds than road runners. We also found that on the second study, that VO2 max is the main predictor of performance up to 100-kilometer races, and then that lipid oxidation, strength, and body composition may also impact performance. From the third study, we found that cost of running is impaired following races of up to 55 kilometers, but not races longer than 100 kilometers. And then finally, that in the fourth study, we found that cycling exercise leads to a greater impairment in cost of locomotion than running exercise. So this is it. Thank you very much. And I guess it's time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Fred, for the presentation. So we are going to ask the first reporter to comment and ask questions. So Dr. Fabrice Wilkerson.
Thank you, Jean-Benoît. Just before beginning my speech about your thesis, I would like to thank again Guillaume for the invitation. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here with everybody, despite the little adventure this morning, but I'm here and that's essential for you and for me. So as I said, it's a real pleasure to discuss about an attractive, interesting research topic in sports sciences. So I'm really happy for you because you have finished your PhD today, and in a few hours you would have probably the opportunity or the capacity to project yourself in the world of research, and I think it's a good thing now in your life. We discussed about that 1 hour ago. So concerning your manuscript, I was very happy to read it. I think that your work is of high scientific quality, providing new insights in the understanding of training performance, and especially the relationship between running economy and the trail running with different exercise duration, but also the identification, of biomechanical and physiological factors in this activity. So you have presented in your manuscript 4 articles, whose 2 now to date published in international journal.
Okay, hopefully it works now.
Yeah.
You hear me? Yeah. So one of them has been published. No? Yeah. Okay. So one has been published, one has been accepted, one we're actually not sure if it has been accepted or not.
Okay.
The other one is about to be submitted. I haven't submitted the last one because I was worried about the thesis. But
Okay. So it's really a good stuff, and I did enjoy the strong link between your first publication and the last one over the overall experimental design in your phases. And to my opinion, it's really a challenge to keep a certain continuity between studies. So furthermore, you you have had a good opportunity to create a link with the PhD students in your lab, because you did participate to different experimental design, and you keep this linearity of your research. So I would like to congratulate for all these points, and I appreciate your oral presentation, very close to the high quality of your written work. So if I go back to your manuscript, I'm going to ask you some minor questions about the theoretical content of your phases, and afterwards I'm gonna focus on more specific details concerning your articles. So if I go back page 22, and you should is the same graph on the slide 11
I will put it up
from memory.
see.
Slide
Yeah.
11. Yeah. Okay, so this graph is really interesting, especially for the double XS, because the graph shows that runners spend a great time of training race above 19% of heart rate reserve. So what does it mean in terms of pacing strategy? Because when I see this graph, I think about the publication by Bourne et al. In 2007. Do you remember this publication? Yeah.
Heart rate.
Yeah, with the use of NIRS system in ecological context. So what does it mean in terms of strategy, pacing strategy?
This is
Yeah,
specific.
just if you focus on
on
the
the XXS. So
yes.
this, a particularity of this that I am not sure how clear I made it on the manuscript, actually, now that you mention it, is that I think it's possible that all of the data on the XXS races came from, if they were not vertical kilometers, they were always very short races, that they didn't, most of the elevation was uphill elevation. So what you mentioned about from the study of Bourne et al., I think that it's mostly about the difference in heart rate while going up, and also downhill, that heart rate may not be a good representation of the intensity when running downhill. And this is what they, I think, wanted to show, and this is why they use the NIRS as well. So I think that in terms of pacing, for the specifics of the studies from which I took this data, they were mostly uphill, so I don't know how relevant this is for this, but I do think still that the study of Born et al. Gives insight into this, and I think there's also a publication from the group of Lemire that has shown that there is a greater VO2 when, like, there is a greater heart rate for a lower VO2, or like heart rate is the same but lower VO2 when running downhill when compared to running uphill. So it is true that heart rate might not be the best possible value or the best possible measure to measure performance or to measure intensity during trail running races. It has the advantage that it is very easy to measure, and I think this is why it has been reported in this previous literature. But I think that there might be promise to using some of these technologies, such as NIRS that you mentioned. But at the same time, I am a bit hesitant about this. I am definitely not an expert on NIRS. I know very little about NIRS. But from what I have talked about with people who have used it much more, what they tend to say is that the NIRS, it's pretty difficult to get right when you do it in the lab. Like these small units, such as the MOXIE, for example, that the data is not super reliable. So I would be hesitant before I know more to tell you, like, oh, I think this is the solution. But I definitely think that at the same time, also heart rate is not the solution because it's not measuring this difference. So it might be better than heart rate.
But I think it's a good example because you have the possibility to characterize the physical engagement of trail runners, because when you spend a high time above 90% of heart rate reserve or maximal heart rate, so you have the possibility to run the downhill and uphill section at similar metabolic intensity.
Yeah, it might be possible, but I think there is this difference with. So I think that you can run them at the same RPE, but I am not sure if this will be at the same metabolic intensity, because even if you are going at the same very high speed, during the downhill, there is a predominance of the eccentric contractions. Then the eccentric contractions are more efficient, therefore they require less oxygen. So then the metabolic intensity would be lower during the downhill, even if you're going as fast. So I am not sure if exactly the metabolic, like if you can, for example, I think that when doing a VO2 max test on downhill, the VO2 max reached is lower, showing that you cannot reach the same metabolic intensity if we understand that VO2 is a proxy for metabolic intensity.
Okay, thank you for your response. I agree with the majority of your details. So can this tendency be influenced by the practical level of athletes?
In this case, I think that since I took this from different studies, I don't remember the specificities of each one of them, but I think there were trail runners that were that they were not elite, and I think that the level might affect it. But I think that if their distance is short enough that, and they are trying, and they are trained, and they have enough experience to know how to pace and to how to sustain a high intensity, it will be close to this, depending on the race distance, of course, because then this is the point. In an XXS race, you could have, in theory, because of the way of the division of races by the ITRA, like they say that the approximate winning time is 1 hour, but it can be anything between 20 minutes, that never happens, and maybe something like a little longer than 1 hour. So then the total amount of time spent in this higher intensity zone could be very different. Like a vertical kilometer would be here, and the winner is doing 30 minutes instead of 1 hour.
So, another question. I read in the manuscript that the prize money and sponsorship may explain the high frequency of competitive events in road runners compared to trail runners. Okay, I agree with you. It's a point of view, but which other factors might explain the capacity of trail runners to accumulate many races within a short period of time?
Yeah, so I think that this might be related to several different factors. Some of them are, I'm going to call them psychosocial, such as the prize money, and some others that might be more physiological. So if I go to the psychosocial first, I think there is the prize money. Then another reason is that if they have to, if like assuming that they have to compete more for money, they decide first that they have to do more races. So then they could periodize their training and prepare their training to, instead of be at 100% to one race, be at 95% for several races, which could be, this is a mix between psychosocial and training. So they may not be peaking as high for one race, but preparing themselves to run more different races. And then there is the factors about like that may be more physiological or biomechanical, such as trail runners are running, I mean, road runners. If they are running the marathon, they are running 42 kilometers on the road that is very hard at a very high speed. This speed is constant. It's also much more repetitive. So like even if they were running at the same duration, at same average speed in trail running, they would be doing jumps like left and right and things like that. That will change a bit the muscles that are being used. So I think that this might affect the recovery between races. And we don't know enough about this at this moment, but it's actually one thing that Guy is going to look at he has a new PhD project, hopefully we'll get funding for next year. And we want to do, well, Guy wants to do, I will probably not be here anymore. I don't know if I will be able to participate in some capacity in that research, but looking at what are the differences in recovery after like a road marathon and the equivalent duration race on the trail, to see if this is actually happening. For example, the greater impact in a hard surface affects it.
Maybe it will be a future question in your work.
Yeah. And I don't know if it will be.
To have a look about.
Yeah. And I don't know if it will be in my work, but it's probably going to be a
Yeah.
future question in this lab because Guy has already, I think, applied for the funding, right? Exactly. Great.
I understand. So, in your manuscript, you use the concept of critical speed, and to my opinion, or based on literature data, the critical speed is often used for the swimming domain. So, how do you use this kind of indicator of intensity and the translation to the trail running?
Okay, yeah, so this is actually a very good, well, two things first. So I use critical speed when I use it to report past literature, like things that other people have said, and I use it because it's the one that they used in their studies. And critical speed in, like, be it swimming, running, or critical power in cycling, it's some people say it's a physiological threshold, and some people say it's a mathematical construct that is derived from the intensity-duration relationship of exercise. So like, I do not have a power duration curve here that I could show, but there is a relationship between the intensity that you can reach and the time that you can sustain it for. So this has been done in cycling with critical power, in swimming with a critical swimming speed, and in running with critical speed. And now there are several studies that I do cite in the thesis that use it, taking data even from Strava, for example. There is the data of Andy Galbraith from the United Kingdom. And I think he did his thesis in the University of Kent, because I think Louis Passfield, whom I know from Calgary when I did my master's, was one of his supervisors. And his thesis was on looking at the concept of critical speed. And for example, he measured critical speed doing several treadmill tests to exhaustion and compared it to a critical speed test on the track. So it has been used in the literature, and there is, I would say, enough literature about it. Actually, we will probably use it in a future study that we will do with runners, measuring critical speed with different runs of different distances on the track. Specifically going to trail running, here at the LIBM, but in the site of Chambéry, there is a researcher, Baptiste Morel, who is looking specifically at this question. So he's looking at the question of critical speed and what is the relationship of the critical, looking at some sort of the relationship between, so I was talking about the power and duration relationship, And there is also, as well, we have GB here, and I showed here before, like there is the force-velocity relationship or the power-velocity relationship. So he's trying to integrate the three things at the same time. So the duration, the power, and the intensity or the force. So then he wants to have like, what is the, using mathematical modeling, especially taking data from Strava, but also then validating it in the laboratory. What he's trying to do is putting people to run, like in theory, like theoretically, if you were to do it on the lab, you would put people to run on the flat to measure their critical speed, and then at different hills to measure their critical uphill speed at different inclines, and then create a mathematical model that would derive what is the maybe critical metabolic power or what is the function of critical speed depending on the trail incline. So far, only for uphill. I don't know if this is applicable at all for downhill.
But it's not classical to use it for,
No,
for running.
like,
It's not really easy.
No, absolutely not. And this is what and he's doing mathematical things beyond my understanding to get these models of critical speed taking into account the uphill.
Okay, so you wrote, sorry, in your manuscript that CHO intakes up to 100 grams per hour have been used in experimental settings with trail runners during a mountain marathon. So, given that the maximal rate of cellular oxidation for CHO is about 1 gram per minute, so could you go back to the mechanism underlying this nutritional strategy, please?
This is definitely, I put it.
Sorry, this is a study by
And it is
Betel,
a study by Aitor Biribai.
Okay.
And so like I remember pretty well what they did because I read it somewhat recently. They took runners and put them to run a mountain marathon. And so like they were competing in a mountain marathon. And they had three groups. One was 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. One was 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And the other one was 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And their goal was just to show that typically, the normal result from the research of Jukan group has been that you should feed 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, that you can go up to 90 if you do some of training of the gut. And Aitor Biribai, what he wanted to show, and he now works in cycling, I think for the Astana team. So what he wanted to show is that if you can still feed more, and people will accept it if they have the gut training. And they were using a special mix, but that wasn't that special. It wasn't the Martin gels or anything like that. It was, if I remember well, 2/3 maltodextrin and 1/3 fructose to get multiple transportable carbohydrates. So they were using this mix, hoping that this would work. And they showed that in their research, they had somewhat better performance. But at the same time, there were also some of the participants that reported more gastrointestinal issues. But there, if I'm not wrong, there were no differences in gastrointestinal issues between groups. And I'm speaking now on the top of my mind. But they were saying this, so thinking that then you can probably train for it and then eat more, and this will have a performance benefit.
I think it's really a good combination, a good strategy to use both fructose and glucose in drinking for the race, especially for longer trail running races. So just concerning the first studies, so trail runners displayed a more force-oriented force velocity profile, explaining the greater maximal power in trail runners. So why you don't select maximal theoretical force in your prediction model? Why you don't select this parameter?
You mean on the second study?
On the second study, yeah.
Why do I not use it? So actually what happened there is that when we went to look at those, so we were taking into account two different things. Well, I don't need to go, I think. But we were taking into account two different things. One is which one of the measures that we're taking is the most physiologically robust, such as we wanted to take VO2 max, for example, instead of the peak speed on the treadmill. Because we did our test was 1 minute increments of 0.5 kilometers per hour, if I am correct, at 12% incline. So this is the protocol that we're using. But then if someone uses, instead of 1 minute, uses 2 minutes, instead of 12%, uses 15%, then this might have an effect on the peak speed that will probably be greater than the effect on VO2 max. So we wanted to try to, so it would be more comparable in the literature. The other one that we wanted to have, and this was a debate that we had, like I had this debate with Lee, should we use F0 or should we use the MVC? And in the end, we decided to choose the MVC for the reason that it has been more used in the literature before, which is probably not the greatest reason. And then also because it was a real measurement that we were measuring. So F0 is always an extrapolation. So we had to choose one of them because they were very highly correlated one to the other. So F0 is an extrapolation. The other one is a real measurement that we are measuring what we're measuring. And this is why we chose that. Although I still think that it might be interesting to look at what happens when you put F0. And then when I cheated the model and I tried to put them in there, I can confirm this to you, but I'm pretty sure that it was still a significant predictor, but less than MVC.
It would have been interesting to introduce this muscle factor in the next prediction model in the future investigation. Guillaume, maybe?
Yeah, but when the problem was that when we could not put both of them at the same time because they were very highly correlated, and then the model went crazy. I talked to Enrico, I think he left that, but he knows much more about statistics, and he told me this happens because of this, that the very high correlation between both of them makes them, like, the one that comes first is the boss, and then the second one, say the opposite. Because you're removing the effect of the one from the other one, and they are very highly related one to the other.
Okay. We'll see tonight, okay. So you showed a lake of correlation between running economy and relative performance in a distance in study.
I will show you
the third study, I think. Now.
This one?
Yeah. And I'm really happy to see this result because I think that the choice, the selection of level treadmill running is not really a good methodological choice because we should in the past that when we use the running economy at level running is never correlated with performance, and I think this is the best gold standard method, but just for road running, not for trail running. So you have to put now more and more running economy from measure from outdoor conditions. So when as the study presented by Nico et al. In 2021.
Yeah, I think
so what do you think about that, about the use of level running?
Yeah, okay, so in this study, we put it like that in part for practical reasons. That's why also we chose an absolute speed of 10 kilometers per hour because we wanted to have some measure and we wanted to do it before the VO2 max test. And we did this, and this was both the testing session and familiarization session for everything else. And it was partly because of the constraints of the time that we had when the first people came here. Ideally, if I had had the choice, I would have done at maybe 10 and 14 kilometers per hour. Like if I had had any choice, I would have done the VO2 max test first and then come back again and do it relative to the threshold, for example, and both in flat and uphill. So then we will have had much more data that was strong data. But in this case, we didn't have the possibility to do this because people were coming here to the lab and we were testing maybe 8 or 9 people per day at some point, that they were going between stations, going to the VO2 max and then to the familiarization with the neuromuscular data that was part of the thesis of Thibault. So they were doing all of this, and it was a material question of time that we couldn't put other things. So then we wanted to have some measure of running economy, and then we chose to do that at 10%. I mean, at 10 kilometers per hour. But then I totally agree with you that, and it is, I think, what I was trying to say at the end, that it is probably not enough to just put, like, even if you go uphill, I would still like to see what happens when you put someone to measure this running economy and compare it. And we keep talking about running economy, but even walking economy, because at 40% incline, people are going to be walking and not running. And in very, very long races, even the best runners at 20, 25% incline in a 170 kilometer race, they would probably be walking. So the walking economy is probably more relevant than the running economy. So I would like to see all of that done. I don't know if by me or someone else, but I think this should be done. And then at the same time, there is this other thing, and it is one project that we want to start working on with a master student, like starting in January, this comparison of what is the running economy when you run on a treadmill, like we'll try to put a similar incline, but on a treadmill, on a road, and on a trail. And is it the same? Like if you are good in one, are you also good in the other one? Or do we find what we found in the end here, that there are basically no correlation between doing the same elevation profile on a trail and on a treadmill? And this is like on a trail, what is relevant is your running economy on the trail, not on a treadmill.
And this is in line with the question review by Leo in 2007. This review showed that no significant alteration in energy cost of running after long running. So maybe the solution is to combine or to mix, to average different treadmill settings, such as taking uphill and downhill and level running, and calculate an average running economy, just to justify the choice of treadmill in a lab, for example. So maybe this is an issue on idea to characterize, to better characterize the running economy. Okay. In the first study, so I was really surprised about the result concerning VO2 max, because you showed no significant differences in VO2 max values between not trail runners, but
running and cycling.
Running and cycling. So from memory, only high-level triathletes exhibited similar VO2 max values, probably explained by the cross-training effect. So how do you explain the lack of significant difference between cycling and running in runners? Probably this is the population of.
They were triathletes or runners who did quite a lot of cycling training.
Okay.
So I don't remember exactly now at the top of my head the number of hours, but that they did on each discipline. But actually, I think that on average they did more hours cycling than running. If you take the average of the group, they did more hours. And if they are triathletes, a normal triathlete that is training for both running and cycling will already do more cycling than running. So I think that it's simply that they were not high-level triathletes. They were like normal triathletes or trail runners who did a lot of cycling training. But simply what I would say is that they did enough cycling for their VO2 max to be comparable to their running VO2 max.
Okay, thank you for this precision. And you should only an altered running economy after 3 hours of cycling, not after 3 hours of running in your population.
Exactly.
You showed an alteration in metabolic power. So and you explain this alteration by the change in muscle fatigue.
We think that one possible that one possible contributor may be this change in muscle fatigue, that at least it had a high correlation with the possibly effect of fatigue on cadence, and then greater cadence showing greater increase in cost of running.
And what do you think about the modification in fiber tip recruitment?
So this is an interesting point, because about the modification on fiber type recruitment, there is data that I find to be at least conflicting. That, well, with fatigue, what happens is that if they have been doing an intensity, there will have been rotation in the fibers. Therefore, at the beginning, due to Hahnemann's size principle, they will be using mostly slow twitch fibers, but then they will go and use also fast twitch fibers due to the rotation, and then there will be glycogen depletion. So, and fast twitch fibers fatigue faster. So my expectation would be that at the end, all fibers are fatigued, but especially fast twitch fibers. So then you would be using more slow twitch fibers than fast twitch fibers. If this is the case, what could happen was, the way in which I see that this could affect an increase in cadence, for example, is that because the power is fixed, so you have to produce the same amount of force. To produce the same amount of force, you have fast twitch, slow twitch fibers working that are more fatigued, and or like they are less strong, and they are already fatigued. They have less force production capacity. So maybe your only solution to produce the same power is to increase the speed at which you pedal. So this is what I think. At the same time, there is some data which shows that there might be a greater activation of fast twitch fibers at greater cadences. But I think that in the end, this data has generally been taken by extrapolating the force velocity relationship in single muscle fibers. But I'm not sure if I have ever seen anything that shows that if you take a human, put him at a greater cadence, and take a biopsy, is there really a greater use of fast twitch fibers after fatigue? I don't think that, I have not seen that data. If you have, please send it to me, because I would like to see it.
Just a last question, please. I was surprised also about your cadence values, because after 3 hours of cycling, you showed that the cycling cadence was very high. And based on literature data from memory, in 2000 to 2010, many studies showed a decrease in free diffusion cadence towards energetically optimal cadence, especially in non-cyclists. So how do you explain in your study that your population keep at a high frequency during 3 hours of cycling? Is not really classical.
Yeah. So first of all, what you are saying there is that especially in non-trained cyclists, and maybe one thing is that they were trained enough in cycling, because I don't know where is the threshold between not showing this change and showing this change, like how much training does it require? And I don't know this, and maybe they were already above that threshold. And it is true that there is this data, for example, the study of Anaheim in 2010, that shows a decrease in cadence towards the energetically optimal cadence, and the energetically optimal cadence also decreasing. And I'm not sure if this was after 1 hour or 2 hours. It wasn't as long as 3 hours. So as far as I know, from what I was checking, there was no data beyond 2 hours, if I am correct. And then I don't really have any explanation of why this is. I'm thinking that maybe one thing that we did, yes, I'm not sure exactly what was the methodology in those studies, but one thing that we did was that we took that measurement at the end. So it might just have been that then being excited and just like, oh, we want to finish, come on, okay, like it's the last effort, we finish. And then it might be a psychological thing that was leading to this. And this is something that we cannot know now. Actually, something that I would be very interested in is to see what happens, like basically repeating the same study, which I don't know if we're going to do, but repeating the same thing and then measuring at free cadence and then at a fixed cadence to see if it would be like to really account for what is the effect of cadence on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederic, for your work.
But sorry, one thing that happened is that during the cycling, so they were cycling on an SRM ergometer, which had the cadence fixed, and at some points, as they were pedaling, they felt slowing down, and then it was like, it's very hard, it's very tough to pedal every time, and it was like, and we course, were providing encouragement, saying, okay, come on, come on. And then like they would get up and accelerate their legs. So what they did when they were tired was to try to accelerate always, not to try to keep it slower, because if not, I think it was too hard to push on the pedal because they had to exert too much force to keep the same power.
Okay, thank you for your response and the high quality of your responses, and have a good continuation.
Thank you, Fabrice. Thank you, Fred, for your presentation. It was very didactic, and it was very nice to hear you. Thank you, Guy, for the invitation. Also, thank you to all of you to be here, because it's a big moment for you, Fred. It's the end of 3 years. I think it was hard with the context and with the pandemic. With Fabrice, we take part of your committee, the following during your thesis. So it's hard this period, I think, for all of you, all of students, to defend this thesis, to do your thesis in 3 years with the pandemic in the middle. So congratulations for your work here and for all what you did from this year. First, thank you for the quality of the document. I take a lot of pleasure to read the document. It was nice, and I really enjoyed the first part of the document with all the context of dry running, because I like when the science is context by all, and the science can be applied to the field. So congratulations for that. I have some questions, of course. It's nice. Just for the beginning, just a little remark, because you studied the fatigue. And I think studying the fatigue on dry running it's very difficult, because you have some people who are involved in races, and people in dry running most of the time take part of the race, with the mentality, the intention of for finishing the race and not perform in the race. That's a big difference with marathon races or road races. In road races, guys want to do 2.5 hours, and if they do 2 hours and 31 minutes, they lose. In trail running, you don't have this mentality, and that's one limitation of our works. And I say our because I study cardiac fatigue on ultramarathon also, and I also study cardiac fatigue on Ironman. And the big difference between road races or Ironman, because you have the same spirit in Ironman races, you have the spirit of the time. You have to do less than 12 hours, and if you put 12 hours, 1 minute, you lose. So we have to make attention about that when we study fatigue with trail running. So that's the first one, and maybe the issue is to maybe to take some races where there is a lot of prize money, because they have the motivation to give their best. So it's maybe an issue for us, but it's more philosophical, not on your thesis. Just one question on your study 2. Study 2 with the lipid oxidation. Can you put the graph, please, with the lipid oxidation? Because in my mind, yeah, that on on long distances, you show that there is no link between lipid oxidation and performance. But on your group, there is a very homogeneous lipid oxidation. Do you think if you use some strategy, diet or something like that, to change lipid oxidation at rest, do you think it could be influence performance on ultramarathon trail running races?
Okay, so that is a very sorry, interesting question, and I think first of all, looking at the fact that of the homogeneity in our long distance races, I think that we were not lucky with the distribution of the performances that we got simply. So like if you see in the short races, it goes from almost 1 to 3. In the long races, it doesn't reach 2.5, and there's only one person that is under 1.5. Most people are there. Same thing actually happens with the lipid oxidation. So I think that with the distribution, we were a bit unlucky to actually show relationships. And what you're saying about the diet interventions, for example, I think that it is a very interesting topic, and work has been done that is like people who do like metabolism, like the work of Louis Burke. Like Louis Burke, for example, has been studying dietary interventions for like especially high fat, and she has mostly studied in Olympic sports, and they show that they have no effect. Like they can increase fat oxidation, but it has no positive effect on performance. And they have showed this even in 50-kilometer race walking. That is probably the lowest intensity event in the Olympics. Even in 50-kilometer race walking, there is no effect on performance. And partially is because they get very good at lipid oxidation, but then they lose carbohydrate oxidation capacity. Now there is other work being done by, I think, especially the people in Liverpool, that I think Julian Luis is one of them, and also Jamie, his last name, but yeah, like that used to be the nutritionist for the Sky cycling team, that they have this idea of the fuel for the work required, that you have to, when you're doing high intensity training or competition, you have to give high carbohydrates, and at low intensity, you have to give low carbohydrates. And then there is the whole idea, big idea of the high fat, low carbohydrate diets that they have shown to increase fat oxidation, but there is no real, as far as I know, there is no real evidence of what happens when you go and do an ultramarathon after. There is data showing that in Ironman races, which are half the duration of the long races still, that their performance is related for, I think, both men and women. It is related to fat oxidation. And there's also the study by Martinez Navarro that showed that in a 110, I think, kilometer race, there was a relationship between the better fat oxidation and better performance. Also, they were using better methods that we were using here, because I'm just taking here the percentage of fat oxidation at the point that we measured, and they were actually doing a fat max test. So they were measuring it in a, yeah, like in a method that was specifically designed for that. Not as is our case that we put this measure on something that we were already measuring, and that was the cost of running. So I think that there might be advantages, because if it happens in Ironman that is 10 hours, it should also happen in the other one. However, from what I know about the research in nutrition, this is obviously not my area of expertise, is that you should be somewhat careful with giving too much prevalence to lipids in the diet, because then you could lose some carbohydrate oxidation, or actually it might be closer led to overtraining. Now it's coming to my mind that I read once a study that showed that even if you match the calories in the diet, having less carbohydrate had worse consequences for bone density, which might lead to stress fractures in the future. So I think that those dietary interventions that are a bit extreme, they have to be taken carefully, at least until there is more evidence. But I think that it would be also a very cool study to do, like, but you need people to change their diet for a couple months maybe, and then go and do an ultramarathon. So like you need two very difficult things. Ultramarathoners are very strange. There are not that many in the world. And then people that want to change their diet, knowing that it might have a negative impact in their performance.
But you say something was very interesting on the methodology. I don't have in my mind that you measure the fat oxidation during the energy cost and not it was not the maximal point of fat oxidation. Thank you. Another one question on a study 3, you put the subject at 80% of maximal aerobic speed before and after the trial. But did you have a stable state during the measurement?
Okay. This is a very question, actually one that I was expecting. So to be clear, what we did was on the level running, they were at 70%, and on uphill running at 15%, they were at, no, on the level running, they were at 90%, on uphill running, they were at 70%. And then this was at the speed measured at 12% incline during the VO2 max test. Okay, so like even if we were measuring at 12% incline, so the highest maximal speed that we got was 14.5 kilometers per hour. And this was a guy that had a VO2 max of 80 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So just to have an idea, we also had like elite, can I say the name or is this illegal? Oh, okay, I do not say names then. Okay, yes, exactly. So then, but yeah, like we had some like professional runners, their maximal speed was about between 14 and 14.5, and then different duration in that palier. And then we took, for example, 90% of the speed of 14 kilometers per hour, 14.5 kilometers per hour would be 13 kilometers per hour on the flat. That for someone who has a VO2 max of 80 should be very easy. So this on the flat. On the uphill, we had a problem, which is that we specifically wanted to measure cost of running and not cost of walking. So because of this, what we did was we had to choose a speed that was high enough that for the people that were less fit would have to run and not walk, or at least would be able to run and not walk. So this was a tricky thing. At the same time, I think that we were a bit lucky because there is one methodological issue with this study that we took in the end, we took the cost of running at 3 minutes and not 4 minutes. That this was like, it is in the paper. And the reason why we did that was because if we took 4 minutes and 4 minutes, we didn't have enough data to do anything with it. So we expected to have enough data with 4 minutes and 4 minutes, but we couldn't because the intensity was maybe too high. So we took 3 minutes and 3 minutes. When comparing before the race, there was a steady state. There was no difference between 3 minutes and 4 minutes. And actually, like there was no significant difference, and it was higher at 3 minutes than at 4 minutes. So it went up and then it went down a bit. This was before the race on the subjects that we kept in the end. And then after the race, it was significantly greater at 4 minutes, but 0.10% in the flat and 1.1% in the uphill. So if you take this amount of change, 0.8%, and you translate it, normally people say there is a steady state if there is an increase of less than 100 milliliters per kilogram per minute, or 100 milliliters per minute, actually, 100 milliliters per minute. It was smaller than this. This 1% increase was smaller. So by any description of steady state, it will have, that is in the literature, it will have been considered steady state. At the same time, I think that we were lucky because what happened, we were lucky in our methodology of removing the 3 minutes, because what happened was that the people who were not at steady state in the post, it was too hard for them. Therefore, they couldn't even finish 3 minutes. So they were eliminated from the study.
Okay, thank you. Just for the study 4, you have an alteration in VO2 max on runners after the 3 hours of intensity, but you also have a mean intensity during these 2 hours with greater in running. Could it be related because you have more intensity during 3 hours, you have more alteration of VO2 max after? It could be an issue or not?
I think that it could be a possibility. I think it's mostly actually not related to the intensity, but to the fact that running is harder on the muscles, and therefore it forces you to stop earlier. But regarding the intensity, like it was greater, but metabolically should have been the same because it was set in the same intensity domain at 105% of the same threshold, so everyone would have the same metabolic intensity. I didn't put the graph here, but there is the graph of the lactate. The lactate was exactly the same. So in theory, the intensity was the same. Actually, it represented a greater percentage, and maybe it might be related to some specificities of the like stretch shortening cycle fatigue or something like that. So I think it's a modality specific thing rather than an intensity specific thing.
Yes.
Actually, we have some data, as I said here. One thing that happens is here is the intensity, and we have started to do some data that with a study by Callum over there that we compared only with cycling at different intensities, and we show greater decreases in intensity when exercising above the threshold compared to below the threshold. There was a bigger decrease in VO2 max. But in our case, everyone was at the same point respective to the threshold. So I don't think it was intensity.
Yeah, okay, I'm agree with you also. In this study also, which is very interesting because you make a link with running and cycling, and I think there is a lot of link to do in the training. You show that the cost of locomotion is decreased in cycling, but do you think it could be used as a training method in order to train trail runners for ultra marathon? Use cycling and this fatigue of locomotion?
So you mean use the fatigue that is caused, like the greater cost of locomotion that happens in cycling? So you mean using cycling training for ultramarathon runners?
Yeah.
I think that, so, but this is, I think, not related to the data. I'm going to be telling you my opinion about this, and this is my opinion on training, which I'm very happy to do. But so on this, I think that especially when people don't have access to a lot of vertical gain and loss, which may not be your case in Font-Romeu because you are super lucky to have that, but for other people in flatter places, it might be one way in which they can practice exercising, especially their knee extensors and knee flexors from a greater angle of flexion, so like from here, because this is what will happen to them on the races. So this is just thinking about the modality. About the fact that it has this greater change in cost of locomotion, I don't know exactly what would be the implication for training runners using this fatigue. I would actually be very careful of like what I would not aim to do is like do transitions like triathletes do of fatiguing them first with cycling and then doing running, because then this greater cost of locomotion may come with greater fatigue or something, and then like losses of coordinations that might lead to more risk of injury, for example. So I don't know if this is where you were going, but if not,
Okay, no, thanks. I will come back on the study one. The conclusion is nice with the development of force that you say that trail runners need more force, more strain than road runners, but in all kind of sports as cycling or others, do you think trail runners need force or strain like cyclists on knee extension or not?
well, comparing to other sports, like
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what would be the case, and also especially because you mentioned cycling, for example. I think that cycling can be a very, like you can have massive differences in cycling between sprinters and climbers or time trialists in terms of the amount of strength development. And if you take like pure sprinters on track cycling, they have legs this big, where if you take the skinny climbers, they have much more different development in like in their quadriceps or like the amount of force that they can produce. So I do not know exactly like how would I compare it. I would probably say that what happens is that from what I know about the data on training and like performance, like strength as a performance determinant in many sports, actually like probably GP can clarify this, but I think that even for sprinting, that for example, if you want to improve your squat, which we could say instead of the squat, the knee extensor, if you take a sprinter, like you can increase their strength up to some point, and this will give them an improvement in performance. But then you go from there to the double, you hit diminishing returns, and you don't get any more results. So I think that if we wanted to go in that direction of the research, we should try to find this point about like where is the point in which you can, like an increase in strength gives you an increase in performance, but then what is the point after which an increase in strength either doesn't matter or it's just going to make your leg big and make you heavier than the amount of strength that you can apply during running.
Yeah, but that's very important to know that, and I see it could be a future because you need to know the limit. But after if you go too up, you have to take weight and something like that. So I think this point is very interesting to know. Just a last question on the performance factor. You present at the end and in your general discussions some psychological factors who could be important in ultra marathon. What kind of factor do you think beyond that?
I hope there is no psychologist listening to us on YouTube. I don't think there's anyone here because I am not a psychologist and I don't even know what the like real factors as. So I know that in psychology you have to define a like whatever construct that you are saying and like actually measuring what you're making sure that you are measuring what you think you're measuring and things like that. So I don't want to go very far, but I think that they can be things related to motivation, what you were saying earlier, like is your motivation to compete or to finish, which actually I wanted to go back to that, but now I think you have allowed me to. In the UTMB study, for example, we asked after running the race, we asked the people, what was your goal from 0 to 10? Like, was it to enjoy yourself or was it, like we asked the question in French and I don't remember the exact words, but or was it to perform? And people had to mark it. And for example, this was, Thibaut presented this data on his thesis, that women were more enjoyment oriented and men were more performance oriented. And this could have impacts on this, and this is like a decision that you will have done previous to the race. So like what is the effect that the race is going to have, when, like what is this psychological decision, I mean. And I don't know what effect exactly this might have, but of course, if you don't want to push hard, you're not going to push hard. And then there are, I think, many other psychological factors that are probably not defined, which is like, for example, the amount of fear that you have to running fast in the dark, which I think that it's so many things that I don't know exactly if this is a combination between a psychological factor and your technical ability when running on difficult terrain. But you're going to be running in the dark at night during an ultra trail, and you only have your small light. And how scared are you of how fast you can go? Maybe like compared to broad daylight, do you lose 10% of your speed or do you lose 30% of your speed? And this might be, well, it's psychological, but at the same time, maybe people who wear glasses are worse at it. So I think that there are so many things that we don't know relating to these psychological factors that we could make a huge list of things that might have an effect that then will have to be tested for to actually see if they have any kind of effect on the performance. But I think this motivation, fear, like psychologists measure things like grit scales, willingness to suffer, pain tolerance, many things might have an effect.
Thank you, Fred. Congratulations for your job. It's a nice job, and it was a pleasure to be here for your thesis. Thanks.
Thank you, Gregory. So we are going to listen now to Jamie. Jamie is online, so I guess you can.
Yeah. Well, can we do
Yes,
something about this?
so, Jamie, you're hearing us, right?
I'm here. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. So we will soon see you.
Let's
So
try.
it's your time to comment and question, and I guess you can use something like 15 to 20 minutes in total.
Excellent. Thank you.
So Fred, make sure to have short answers, because as you know, more short answers means more questions.
Oh, great. You can cut me.
All right, Fred, if that's how we're going, I'm only going to ask yes or no questions here. Just kidding.
Yes.
First of all, I also just wanted to say thank you very much for including me. Thank you to Guy for the invite. Your thesis was a real pleasure to read, and I mean that sincerely. There was times where I forgot I was reading a thesis. I felt like I was just reading a textbook, and I was really enjoying it. And I made that comment to my wife last night. I will echo that I thought you did a really good job in the background with a thorough review of the literature, and thought it was really helpful. And I just wanted to say publicly that, oh, still good? Okay. I just want to say publicly that, I mean, your laboratory has a very good reputation, and kudos on adding to that reputation and contributing to good work coming out of that lab. So with the pleasantries aside, I will jump right into it. I actually had a number of questions here that were sort of addressed already. So we'll start easy and then get into some more maybe speculative stuff. One of the things, as I was reading the road versus trail runner study, that occurred to me was this idea of the difference between road cycling and mountain biking. And so my first question was actually going to be, are there differences in terms of the skill sets? And I think you did a pretty darn good job of answering that because you've already run that study. However, I will build on that a little bit. So there clearly are, but I'm curious, what does that mean for the physiology? And so when I think about mountain biking versus, say, a time trial, there are clear differences in the way power has to be applied, in that it's much more punchy. You know, there's bursts of that. Do you think that this applies to the running as well, and in the way that athletes recover and that kind of thing?
I think so. I think that so as we when I saw the heart rate responses to someone who was fourth in the New York City Marathon and someone who was fourth in the Zegama Marathon, that was a trail running marathon, especially like this one, I chose it on purpose because it was impressive when you put the graph, and also it's usually run in very muddy conditions. So I think that you could see that, and this is looking at heart rate that has a long response time. Like there might be like a 30 to 60 second response time of heart rate, and you could still see this huge variability compared to road running. And I think that it's not exactly in the same way as it happens when you compare a time trial to a mountain bike race, because in a mountain bike race, or maybe even more in like running, but I think that covering the gaps when like someone passes you or like trying to catch someone requires a much greater increase in power from whatever your baseline is at that moment, like a greater jump above your average, let's say. Whereas in trail running, I have the feeling that the runners are not catching the runner in front of them as fast because they are not as scared of like losing the runner in the next like few meters, let's say the next uphill or the next downhill. They think like, I will run him down in the next like whatever, like a longer time period. So I think that the jumps will not be as big. And then I think it's something that I wish we had a way to measure power, like a real way to measure power in running, because we don't. And when measuring power in running, but in cycling, you see those huge jumps that you can have someone whose average power in a mountain bike race is 200 watts, but reaches 800 watts 15 times or 30 times during the race. And I wish we had some of this data, especially if we had things like step-by-step data in running, because on step-by-step data, it's like in running, you have one step, you're not applying power all the time, you're applying power, and then you have the aerial phase. But especially you have both like jumps when you jump down, and you have to you may jump more than 1 meter drop, or you may have to take one step in which there is a rock and take a big step. And I really wonder what is the effect of how much variability does that add. So
yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that's bang on, because I suspect, and I'm speculating here too, but it's probably these micro, they're not these huge jumps, and it's probably not even reflected in heart rate very well.
Yeah.
It's more at the muscle level. Okay. Another question that you've already sort of touched on, but I want to come back to it a little bit. I understand why you opted to use a bike for your force velocity profiling. I mean, it's tough working with elite athletes, and I get that, and I appreciate that. I was curious, what sort of an RPM were these athletes? You mentioned that they did want to hold a higher power because so that the resistance didn't get too high for them. But what sort of power were they actually keeping here? Like, do we think perfusion became a limiting factor for the non-cycling?
So we're talking about the fourth study here, in which I compare running and cycling, right?
Sorry. We could talk about that as well. I was sort of thinking of the first one still, where you did the force velocity.
their peak powers, in like the force velocity profile, the sprints were 7 seconds, 8 seconds. Like, don't quote me on any of those, but 7 or 8 seconds.
Okay.
And usually people reach their peak power in 5 to 6 seconds, or like their peak speed of pedaling. So in the end, the powers for the men, they were, if I am correct, about, well, I'm saying for the men because for Thibault's thesis, we also tested women, but they were about 11 watts per kilo.
Okay.
So for a 70-kilo runner, that would be about 800 watts. So they were not huge powers. They were not doing huge, like compared to what a cyclist can do. Like we were having elite trail runners and the ones that look muscular doing maybe this, like 800, 900 watts if they were heavier. Whereas a cyclist that would be a sprinter would be doing 1600 watts.
Yeah.
So I don't think, and also it's like it's a 7-minute effort. So I don't think that you will have those effects of perfusion yet, but I don't know enough about perfusion.
Sorry, I think I kind of confused
Seconds,
myself
yeah,
there.
seconds, yeah.
The two areas. Absolutely, that makes sense. It would be a sprint. What sort of RPM are we talking though? Like, are they only able to hit like 100 RPM or 150? Because I imagine they don't spin that fast.
No, they were spinning up to like 120, 130, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Like maybe the fastest one that we measured was 135.
Okay, great. Continuing just with study 1 here, you noted, and I'll just quote you here, there are no differences between trail and road in flight time, contact time, step frequency, duty factor, leg stiffness, vertical stiffness, in any measured condition. This was despite road training and competing at a faster speed, which leads to shorter contact times. And I think that's really interesting, and I believe that was likely true. I'm curious though, what role do you think using a motorized treadmill played in this? And do you think it would differ if you were to take this outside to a rubberized track, for example?
I think it might. I don't know if I would exactly use like a rubberized track because this might be way more specific to what I'm thinking that in our population, by talking to them, the trail runners may never ever step on a track, whereas the road runners would do their hard training sessions on a track. But maybe even if it would just be like a, let's say, controlled flat road.
Sure.
But I think that it might have an effect because I think that, not an expert in biomechanics, but the fact that you have the foot on the ground and then it's slid down, what Caroline was presenting this morning about the woman at the end of the study that was able to run at this speed because it was on a treadmill, but she does not believe that she would have been able to do that if she were asked to run at that speed on the track. I think that it might have an effect, but I do not know exactly how, like in the magnitude, what the magnitude of that effect would be.
Yeah, I think that's just an interesting thing to consider because in some ways, I think we've seen it with, we have a lot of elite runners that never touch a treadmill. And when we put them on there, they're really awkward because it becomes an exercise in keeping up as opposed to accelerating. Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit to your performance stuff. And I note that you use stepwise models for your multi-regression. I'm curious, did you try to force any variables? Did you use a forward or a backward that maybe I just haven't seen?
No, we didn't. And this, like the choice of the model was an exercise on, I should know more about statistics. And then that like asking for advice on what would probably be the best possible model to use. And then in the end, what happened a bit was that we were not sure exactly and like in which order should we force the things to come in. And then we sort of like, I think that I want to say decided to play it safe, but decided to not try to think, oh, we think they should come first, for example, or like using a forward or backward approach in that sense as well.
Okay. I mean, you said earlier in the questioning, you know, about how it would kick out another variable. And honestly, I think for an exploratory analysis, it makes total sense. And that's actually how we did our work as well. But there might be some value in going back and looking at that where you can manipulate it and say like, okay, like we think this thing is important or we don't want it to overshadow everything else.
Yeah.
I'd be very curious. You have a really cool data set.
Actually, what I did for that was just like me cheating in myself and saying like, okay, what happens if in the statistical problem, like I put VO2 max first, but then I put this one first or the other one first, like sort of like by hand. And like, okay, what happens now? And then in the end, what I found was like after trying lots of permutations that I chose because I wanted to, like the best one was the stepwise approach, but I don't really know like if this still means that the stepwise approach was the best, because I think that there might be issues that are more like methodological, like because we had 2 measures of strength or 2 measures of maximal aerobic performance, for example, that were speed and VO2 max. Should we choose one or the other? And they are conflicting in that way, and I don't know if like exactly what would be the best way to do that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it depends on what do you want your model to be.
Yeah.
Is it the most predictive as possible? Maybe it is. That their case can be made there. But maybe you look at some of your data, and because it's so homogeneous amongst people that are really good to begin with, there's just less value in some of those variables compared to other populations.
Yeah, and actually, this is one thing that I think would be great to study, like develop a model, and then next year take the people and say, okay, now we're going to test how good this model is when you go and run the same race or a different race of the similar distance the year after, and we're now testing the model instead of trying to find what is the model.
Absolutely. And without belaboring the point, I mean, I think it's a real challenge to understand what's going on at the long distance end, right? We haven't been able to do it either. But I wonder if maybe that's where you can start to pull things apart by changing the way you model it. Without going too far off here, I mean, we've worked with elite hockey players. So I'm a Canadian, so of course we look at hockey and drink maple syrup and stuff. But we found in NHL players, there were certain things that we knew were related to fitness, VO2 max, for example, or wind gate power, and they weren't important variables in our predictors because everybody was good at it, right? And there's the homogeneity that just ruins your model. So I'll just put it out there as something to think about as you move forward. Okay, here's a big one that I wanted to talk about. Your findings of fat use. And this sort of spans the two studies. The one where you show at 10 kilometers an hour, there seems to be a greater use in the shorter distances. And also at the end, when we talk about what was happening in the ventilation study. So let's just start with that. I think an important point came up already that this is not fat max, right? It wasn't what you set out to do, and that's okay. But in some ways, I wonder if really what you're measuring is it's just some combination of running economy and fitness, because 10 kilometers an hour is not that fast. It's certainly sub-maximal for your athletes. Do you think that maybe their ability to oxidize greater amounts of fat because the relative intensity is low could be affecting what you saw? And I'm curious if, well, maybe you have this. Did you correlate with things like VO2 max, running economy, or did you co-vary by that to see if that was actually explaining what was happening?
So yes, I do think that we were doing that because, as you said, like we were taking 10 kilometers per hour. So if this exercise is more submaximal for someone who can run at 20 than for someone who can run at 15, like in theory, they would also be using more fat because it's relatively lower intensity. And therefore, maybe what we're measuring is fitness at the same time. So what we did not covariate for it on purpose. I ran all the cross correlations, and if I am not wrong, there was a correlation with VO2 max. I do not have on the top of my head now, but I will look it up. I will check it again. Go to my huge correlation table where I put all the possible variables, and I do think that there was some effect there. But at the same time, in this, that for me is a black box model, selected both of them, selected the VO2 max and the fat oxidation, which I'm assuming that what is doing, like, I wish I knew it better, the statistics, but like it's accounting for the effect of fat oxidation after removing the effect of VO2 max. So yeah, it might still be important.
You're right, and you did your model correctly, I believe, in that you looked at those the collinearity before you put those things in. But where it becomes maybe a little bit challenging is where you have overlapping measures in the way they're calculated. And I'll give you another example here is if you use relative VO2 max, that's divided by body weight to come up with that number. In some cases, it might actually make more sense to use an absolute VO2 if you wanted to include BMI, for example. Yeah. Because otherwise, even though they may not totally line up when you do a bivariate correlation, they may be predicting a lot of the same thing just because of what they are at their heart. So I wonder if maybe that's kind of what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think that this could be the case. I do believe that in part that would be what would be explaining it, even though I am not sure if this would be like, because it was not conflicting with, for example, running economy in this case. But I think that, so I am not so sure that it will have an impact for like that we're measuring the same thing when we're measuring running economy. I think that in part at least we might be measuring the same thing when comparing it to VO2 max or the uphill, or the maximal speed, for example. So I agree that this might be the case. And as I said, like, I think that to really test this, the great thing would be to do a fat max test and measure it for real.
Absolutely. Yep. And it
No
might just be
question.
pointing in the
Yeah,
right
yeah,
direction. I want to follow up one more thing on this idea of RER. So first of all, when we think about, well, what is RER? Let's start there. What goes into that number?
So like how much oxygen is you are taking in and how much like you're taking in and using, and then how much your VO2 and your VCO2s and how
Perfect.
much CO2
Exactly
you're
what I was looking
coming out.
for.
Exactly. So
And what happens when we hyperventilate in terms of partial pressure of gases?
if I am correct and I remember well my physiology, when we hyperventilate, it produces I'm not going to say the scientific word, like we end up breathing out more CO2, which decreases the CO2 in the blood.
Good, agreed. And so keeping that in mind, I'm wondering what you think might be going on with the RER, given that you showed in what was it, study 3 that ventilation was changed. So ventilation has gone up. Do you think that the fact that ventilation has gone up, which is maybe not full-blown hyperventilation, but let's call it a relative overbreathing, do you think that this could be driving the changes you see in RER?
I actually have not thought about that, so I think it's a very good point. And so let me see if I can work it out in my head. So they were breathing more, therefore they would be releasing more CO2. So if this was the case, RER, like real RER, like the real RER, if we look at it at a cellular level, would actually be even lower than the RER that we were measuring, right? Am I correct? Like,
yeah, no, I'm not sure if, I mean, that's gonna be a real tough thing to answer if like at the mitochondrial level, I mean, let's start doing biopsies and I think that's necessarily where it is, but even if you're just blowing off more CO2, you think about the fact that you're measuring this at the mouth.
No, and I think that it might have an effect. If I am not wrong, the changes in ventilation though were similar between groups, so I don't think that they should really have a strong effect in my comparison between groups about what was happening. But I had never thought about this, and I actually think that it is a very good point that it could definitely have an effect, and maybe it's something that should be looked at. But I don't really know how, because maybe it would it require to do measurements of like arterial O2 and CO2 or something like that, and would be super.
Yeah, that gets really hard. If you can't get them on a treadmill, good luck getting an art line into an elite athlete. I feel your pain. Just keeping an eye on the time here. I'll ask just a few last ones here. I wanted to say that I thought study 3 was really cool. I'm impressed that you were able to get people to get back on a treadmill after running. That's quite incredible. We don't see a lot of that. Very practical question here. Was foot health an issue for these athletes? Were they running through streams and through snow and stuff?
Sorry?
Like were their feet, like did they have ultramarathon foot by the time they got back?
So like did some of them have like blisters, for example, or so like some of them definitely had pain, and this could have impacted it. Like I probably should have made it more clear, but yeah, they were having pain. Also, I think that one thing that we're lucky about, as I said in an earlier question, answering to an earlier question, is that the people who had very bad anything did not start. So as I said, there were 46 off the top of my head people who I took to whose data I took out of, I don't remember how many finishers, but it was 50 something finishers. So there were people who either they did some of the neuromuscular testing that was done for other studies. And because but they did not do the running testing because they had foot pain or knee pain or they got blood drawn for another part of the study, but they did not do the running. So we selected somehow, which might affect in the long race what we're seeing, because in the long race, maybe what happens is that the people who would have been a worse cost of running, maybe they were eliminated from the study. So because of that. So we're biasing our sample as we select the people that we choose, but you cannot force them to run. It's like it would not be ethical.
Absolutely, and that's helpful to hear, because I was curious if that would affect gait or the cost of running if maybe it was an external factor. No, it's a real factor. It's just maybe something we need to recognize.
Yeah, but I think it's that like people who had very bad case of that, they did not run.
Okay, excellent. Maybe I'll end with just 2 last questions here. This is a fairly straightforward one. Table 9 of study 3, not that you have to pull it up, but it was your demographic. I noticed in particular the 55-kilometer runners jumped out as being much bigger, much heavier. Was this just, did this group have more males in it, perhaps?
It might have been. I do not remember exactly now, but yeah, because we had a similar thing to like the study of Alex Coates, that they had the distribution of males and females, like you had it more or less even in the 50 kilometers, but not in the other races. So it might have been a similar case of, I think that the proportion, like in the short races, the proportion of females was greater in the 40-kilometer race, and the proportion of males was greater in the 55-kilometer race.
Okay. I guess maybe my comment there would be that there may be value in just showing that, because nerds like me are reading it and trying to figure out between the lines what's going on, because there is sex differences. Yeah. And I mean, potentially these sex differences could well be meaningful. I mean, as we heard this morning, as we all know, fatigue resistance is different between them, and all sorts of things. So last question, I'm just curious, next steps for you. What, assuming all goes well for the rest of today, what's the next step?
Well, first of all, everything has to go well for the rest of today. And then, so I will officially finish my PhD contract on December 31st. And then at least until the end of August, what I am doing is I will stay here in the lab. So Guy offered me a postdoc for another 8 months, so until the end of August. Then I'm not sure after, but academia, real world outside of academia. I finished school now. I'm 29 and I finished school, so I'll have to go and get a real job or something.
It's overrated, I think. Thank you very much. I've appreciated reading a thesis, engaging with you today. I also want to say thank you. I appreciate the English. And I actually really appreciated reading the French bits as well. As a Canadian, I can understand enough, but I won't try to speak it because my accent is terrible. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much to you for being awake for this since like all day. Like, I really appreciate it. I may appreciate that more than you coming all the way here, actually. So thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Jamie. Merci beaucoup. La parole est à Caroline Nicole.
Well, I think you deserve to be drinking something. It's ultra marathon for you today. It's just amazing. Well, while you are drinking and making a pause for yourself, I just would like to add myself to the congratulations for your work, because I also enjoyed it, reading it. I was completely dead in my bed, sick, and I still enjoyed it. So congratulations. I think there would not be so many PhD that I would have been appreciating at that time. So great. It kept me alive and awake. Thank you. And as you are Spanish, speaking so well English, understanding even Canadians, and answering faster than they ask the question. So I think you are just unbelievable, and it's a pleasure. Add to this your knowledge of the literature, because there are so many PhDs we can be reading and we can be discussing with the candidates who don't know so well the literature. But not only you know it, you can speak about it, you know really the content, you can use it in your own work. So congratulations, keep on doing this, it's great. And so you look like mature scientist, although you just finished. Great. So if I want to be a bit different from the others, it's easy, because my topic being neuromuscular system, of course, it's a bit exotic for you. But I would like to come back to the particularities of your trail runs. I'm just amazed by those. And recently there was a PhD defended in Marseille on BMX, on, mountain bike XCO. It's the type of bike where they will be facing the same type of exercises. Really irregular, intermittent work. And what the candidate showed that the elite ones are able, despite of the irregularity of the terrain, of the intensities of the uphill, downhill, to maintain quite stable their own physiological parameters, to keep on being equilibrated. You pointed out in your presentation that you had, of course, much larger heart rate variations. But anyway, those people were able to sustain 160 kilometers or 4 times 40 so nicely. So my question is, first, congratulations to them if there are some present in here today. And second, what type of informations do you think is interesting to examine on those? Because they are able to take informations on themselves, on the environment, in order to remain in equilibrium like this. What is their strength in that?
What is their strength in that? I actually think that it's mostly about this magical thing that coaches talk about of running by feel mostly, because I don't think that they are taking any special technological information. Like they might have some guidance with heart rate, for example, but especially in trail running. In trail running, there's often a reluctance on like, I'm going to run to be in nature. And I think that often this, like, so there will be a combination of this and like they're running by RPE. This is the intensity that I think that I can sustain. And then the experience that will teach them how to pace this, like one race after another, after another, after another, knowing, like I was just thinking about an example of Kilian Jornet that I put in the end, that the first time he ran the Western States race, he finished third and dehydrated. And then for the next time, like taking the information from the previous race, so it was not as much information from the race itself, like from the same race, but from a previous race, like Salomon, created some bottles that you could hold in your hand on purpose for this, so he could get better hydration during the race. So I think that is going to be a combination of mostly this, like their self-perceived sensation of effort and can I sustain this pace? Is this the highest pace that I can sustain? And then calibrating that, maybe is the word, calibrating that with their experience of previous racing, previous distances, things like that. After this, I still think that might be very interesting. I don't know exactly if to make, for example, pacing decisions during the race, or maybe just to analyze the race afterwards, to look at things like heart rate. Like I'm even wondering about now they are doing these continuous glucose monitoring things. Like it's not clear that they are good, but if they are good, how good they are. And then data that is not physiological, but the maximal vertical, like the vertical speed that they are holding, for example, and their like vertical speed and also horizontal speed on the flat. Actually, one thing that I think is very interesting is the downhill vertical speed, because the downhill I think is very interesting. And of course, like for the runner to choose what speed they go at downhill, they have to put together what is the maximal physiological output that I can sustain for this duration that I perceive is going to be the duration. And also I must not fall. It must not be so fast that I lose control. So I think this is all information that, I don't know, like one of these magical things of the brain, that the brain is doing so many things at the same time. But I don't know if we have any scientific data on how this is actually done.
Say, I'm really happy that you just spoke now about the downhill after uphill, because this is what we are doing in Marseille with this Marseille-Gassier race. And I think you may see on these type of events, when you have the uphill and then downhill, those people who are taking the information on the fatigue they got, metabolic type from the uphill, and the way this will influence them in the downhill part. And we are always speaking about uphill tests, and although it was really nice test that you presented this morning, and flat runs on treadmill or whatever, but I don't see tests using these transitions, examining during the downhill the way people are able to take their own fatigue into account. Wouldn't there be any interest to build such tests?
So I have never seen any literature on like doing an uphill test and then a downhill test immediately after. And I am sure that this will happen. And so what you made me think about was what happens not after like Marseille-Cassis is one uphill and then one downhill. But it led me to think about what happens in like a normal mountain marathon race, or like a normal mountain race in which you might have more of them, that at least what happens is that in the last race, I mean, in the last downhill, your legs don't work. Yeah, like and I don't know to what extent it's the combination of those two things. And like you are integrating the information of the previous fatigue that you had to make a decision on how fast you go, but also are you then limited by the self-imposed decision to go at this speed, or are you trying to go at that speed, but then your legs are not allowing you to go that anymore? Because I don't know, like anyone who has done a trail running race or like a race with lots of up and downs at some point will probably have felt that the quadriceps start to contract by itself, and like oh, what is happening to my leg? So those are like having small cramps. So these type of things, maybe you think like, oh, I'm feeling better than this, but my legs are not working the way we want them to work. So I'm not sure exactly how this, like what the impact of this would be, but I think it's actually could be very interesting to make those measurements of like first running uphill and then downhill, and also like not even just on a treadmill. I don't know exactly what would be the specifics, but doing it on a situation in which you have to choose where you put your feet, not just run.
Exactly. It's so rich in terms of adjustments that there's so much to do. But those people are really elite runners for me, and they are rich to study. So if I make a slight jump now to the neuromuscular system or muscle tendon, I've been studying for years Kenyans, and you mentioned them in your manuscript. And we know that those people are incredibly good in terms of running economy on flat terrain. Although they are living on plateaus, they are used to go down, to go up. We never see them on trails, or at least I did not see them. Why?
So like, first of all, about where they train, for example, which is interesting because they're like the Kenyans do train maybe not on like forest trails or like mountain trails, but at least on dirt roads. So they are used to not running on asphalt. And also that made me think that there was a recent book published by an anthropologist, and that was his PhD thesis. I don't remember his name, but it was about Ethiopians. And what he was showing was that like what he was telling, because he went to train with them, and that the Ethiopians, to do a lot of their runs, they actually run them on trails, like trails that they have to stop and like use their hands on their knees, which was interesting to me, like learning this about Ethiopians. And I think that one main reason why these people don't go and do it is that they don't have the incentive. So in like you have to bring a Kenyan from Kenya to Europe to run. What is the Kenyan going to get to do this? If you take them to a road race, the road race pays them an appearance fee. So like this is a little bit going back to what I was saying before that Fabrice asked me about. I think it's money. That the road race is going to ask them to give them money just to come, to give them money if they win or if they do the personal record, like the record of the race. Whereas if you win the UTMB, they give you 2,000 euros. And they get more than this just to go and appear in a 10-kilometer race in Lisbon. However, recently there are races in trail running organized by the International Athletics Federation that are being won by athletes from, I don't think Kenya as much, but Uganda, for example, like other African countries Uganda actually has been improving, like they're like with Jacob Kiplimo and Cheptegei have been improving on the track as well, probably because they had less war than they had before. So maybe like people like that are not like the top from these places, but are like the seconds, are like just below, will be coming more as the sport becomes more popular. But I think it's this money in the end.
Unfortunately, I guess you're right. Because I was really wondering about this, because they are really training in uphills, they are training on plateaus, they have all the qualities that should help. Because earlier we thought they were not that powerful, but they are also getting really powerful. So that was a question I had. Thanks. In terms of motor units recruitments, you wrote several times in your manuscript that people would be using their slow twitch fibers mostly in running. I was wondering, are we able already to be running only recruiting slow twitch fibers?
No, probably not. Like unless, like I was going to say, unless you go at a very, very low intensity, and I guess that depending on your fiber composition, maybe not even at a very, very low intensity. So maybe I should have been more precise when writing that, but I think that we are like, again, the Hahnemann size principle. We tend to use first the smaller fibers. So like we would start with the slow twitch fibers when we are running. And then as the speed increases or as they fatigue, we will start using more fast twitch fibers. But depending on the speed, I guess like at some point you will start using the fast twitch fibers. And especially if they are the most elite runners, they have very high percentages of type 1 fibers compared to type 2 fibers. But especially people who are less elite, they will probably start using their type 2 fibers at slower speeds. Does
Let's
that?
say, I think that you should be mentioning much more often the 2A. Because
okay,
the
yeah,
2A
I see your point.
fibers are really those which are developed,
Yeah.
which are indispensable for this type of performances, which are recruited when you are moving your own body, which may be a difference in cycling.
Yeah.
Why?
Sorry, which may?
What would be the difference at given, not at given speeds, but for given efforts when you are cycling on a bike or running
You're
in
cycling?
terms of motor units?
Oh, I do not know exactly what that could be, but if I'm guessing you know, so it is like an exam question. But if I would expect that on running, maybe because of the faster rate of force development, there might be more because there is less time, less contact time. There might be more implication of the fast twitch fibers. However, at the same time, in cycling, one thing that may happen is that there's a smaller muscle mass that is going to produce the same amount of metabolic power. Therefore, maybe the force per motor unit may be greater. So maybe that will have a greater implication of the type 2 fibers. So this is an I don't know,
You
but
can be much simpler. When
so
you look, for instance, at the Borg scale,
of that, sorry.
Borg rate
on
of
the Borg
passive
scale.
exertion,
Yeah.
it has been built on a bike.
Hmm.
That's why it goes from 6 to 20 to reflect the 60 BPM
Yeah.
to 200. Are you able to be running at 60 BPM?
No, definitely not. Like just standing now, I'm at 88. I'm also nervous, but
I just adore the way you jump all the time to nice things. So what is clear is that when your body weight is carried,
Yeah.
you will have much lesser force to produce.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
you can be recruiting much lesser fast
Yeah.
twitch fibers, okay? But anyway, the 2A are the ones which are good in entrance, in force, velocity, power, are the major ones to be used. So when you are speaking about alternating or alternated recruitment of motor units, can you be jumping from slow to fast and then back to slow?
I do not think that. So I think that at any low speed, you are not using all the, like I'm assuming running or like standing now.
Yeah.
You're not using all of your slow twitch fibers, but you're also, so you're going to be using mostly slow twitch fibers, some faster twitch fibers, some like type 2A, and then there will be cycling as both as the slow twitch fiber fatigue. So this is the case, like if you have, for example, maybe I'm thinking better in an
No, it's
example,
good.
but
Yeah.
if you have a marathon runner who has 75% of slow twitch fibers, he cannot go from slow twitch to fast twitch and then back. At any time, he has to be using both because what 70% of slow twitch fibers can do cannot be done by only 25% of fast twitch fibers. So there will be a combination. And then after they fatigue, maybe the slow twitch have recovered a bit and they are used again. That is my understanding.
Let's say you will have this background of slow plus the 2A that you can be recruiting alternatively. And then when you get to the fast ones, that's when everything goes up.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then like you're tired, you have to stop.
Bon. So this is basic stuff which is important to know because in terms of neuromuscular system, that. Then when you say that blood lactate concentration may influence changes in running cost during exercise. I'll say it again. Blood lactate concentration may influence changes in running cost during exercise. You have been writing this quite a few times.
Yeah, and
What do
I
you
think
mean
that
by this?
if I remember well, I cite a study, and I do not remember the authors now, but they were Norwegian, and like what they did, and this is actually what they did and what they claim in their study, which I may not be exactly agreeing with them to 100%, but they claim that they made them, I think it was cycle first, but maybe, no, it was running, I believe. They made them run first to elevate their lactate, and with a greater elevation of lactate from previous exercise came a greater elevation of cost of running. And if they did this, but at the same time, the first thing that I thought was, this maybe is not caused by the greater lactate, but by the fact that you were doing more intensity at the beginning and therefore more fatigue. So this was the specific study that I cited, and they did that, and it is the one study that I think showed a metabolic parameter that might be related to changes in cost of running. And it was like they said maybe lactate is causing this, and I reported it because like in my mind, I think what happened was we don't have clear evidence of that there are metabolic parameters that in humans you change them and then this changes cost of running. So this was the one that I saw, and I thought that I had to report it, even though I didn't exactly like the methodology because it was this, like you made them run faster and they have a higher lactate, and then they are more fatigued. But is it because of the lactate or is it because of the, it's not like they infused lactate. So if they had infused lactate with an injection, then they could really say that it was lactate. So I agree that it may not be exactly lactate that is.
Yeah, because I think we
Making
should
this
not
bad.
be saying that lactate is leading to any fatigue.
Sorry?
We should not be saying anymore that lactate is
Yeah,
leading to any fatigue.
I agree in general.
Agree?
Although,
In general.
Yeah, because there is, I am very bad with names today because I'm a little bit nervous. Logan Messonnier is doing some work that is like, and he has the idea that it might actually have some effect on fatigue. And then even if not, as you were showing this morning, it might have an effect on the type 3 and 4 afferents that then may lead to fatigue. Even if it's not fatigue that is metabolically causing fatigue, it might go to like inhibiting somewhere else.
You
So
are
this is what I
impressive
think Logan Messonnier was.
because you even know the exception in the literature showing this. Great. No, but this is just me.
And this was cheating for me.
I would, may I have one? So, no, I don't have so much time because I have a train to take later on. You were saying that in uphill, we are fighting against gravity. My question is, in downhill, against what are we fighting?
Okay, this is a good point. Like this is like a rhetorical question now. But you're also fighting against gravity. You're fighting in a different way.
Thanks.
But it's not. I would say that it's like I think that is like the rhetorical way of speaking about. You're fighting against because you're going in the opposite direction. The other way you're not really against because it's going in the same direction. Although your braking force is going in the opposite direction. So technically, yes, you would also be fighting against gravity. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't fight, you
Yeah,
are
yeah, you
just
fall,
on
exactly.
strike,
Yeah, yeah.
sitting on the floor. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so when you go down, we discussed this morning that it may not be always eccentric work. But anyway, when you get more and more tired, you will be using more and more motor units, faster and faster ones. So what does it mean in a given slope? Is the eccentric work being so economical? Does it become lesser economical? Can you change something in your muscles, the way you handle this?
I think that, well, if as you fatigue on the same slope, then like usually you would be getting less economic. Although, as far as I know, from what I know, fast twitch muscle fibers are less economical than slow twitch muscle fibers. But every time that I have thought about that, I have seen this. Well, actually, I think that the studies are done on isolated fibers, and I don't know what is the effect on eccentric. I don't really know if there are differences when you do eccentric, like if there are differences in efficiency of the muscle fibers when you contract them eccentrically. Like, I have absolutely no idea about this. So I don't know if this really will have an effect. But assuming that it does, then like I think that is mostly trying to get in the end the repeated bout effect to delay the appearance of this, like be it muscle damage, be it loss in efficiency, be it just training to train your slow twitch muscle fibers to resist fatigue better, to delay the time when the type 1, when the type 2 fibers get activated. Even though type 2A fibers, when downhill running, will probably always be activated, either downhill or uphill, because they're increased force as compared to just flat.
Okay, so for the fast twitch fibers, there are no many studies making any links between damage and lactic acid. Nowadays, we forget about this, acidosis, PI, or whatever. What is clear is perhaps the only study that really showed it is Jan Frieden, who showed that when you get fatigued, you have more inhomogeneous resistance to stretch within your muscle, which makes that you may get then shearing
Like more-
forces
more-
and then damages. But that's the only link in between this metabolic fatigue and the muscle damage. But are the slow and fast twitch fibers similarly good to resist to muscle damage or not?
This is again something that I do not know about specifically, and I do not know if there are specific differences to this. I'm guessing that it could be possible that the greater size of the fast twitch fibers, this I would guess would also depend on how this measurement is being done. Because if we're measuring one single fiber and stretching it, which one breaks earlier? Would this depend on the cross-sectional area of the fiber, which in a fast twitch type fiber would usually be bigger? But when we're measuring this, like my thinking here is, if you put to run downhill at the same speed a marathon runner and a sprinter, even then, like, you could not really compare it because the marathon runner is going to be much lighter, but who would have more muscle damage? And so if I think about it globally, I think, well, the sprinter, but probably not as much because he has more fast twitch fibers, but because he's heavier. So then I do not really know how we could we could put both of them, but taking weight off or putting more weight on the marathon runner. But I don't know if in the body, what are the differences in this, and if they have been measured, because I'm suspecting that these measures have been done in like isolated fibers or isolated sections of muscle.
I like the way you know how to put everything properly well in a nice order. Well, the fact is the fast twitch fibers is more sensitive to damage because the Z band are thinner.
Because
The Z band at the end of
Ah.
each sarcomere are thinner. But
Ah,
this is something. And but all the rest of your reasoning was fairly good. And that's why perhaps fast twitch people don't like so much
yeah.
running downhill because they feel pain. So if we jump to this pain, can muscle damage leads to pain
Muscle damage itself, I
during
think
the
that
run?
muscle damage at least would lead to inflammation and then activate those receptors that would lead to would give the sensation of pain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what I was wondering is when you have those shorter runs, do we have time to see this inflammatory process developing during the race? Are there papers on that? Maybe so.
I'm pretty sure that when because they took blood samples at the end, and they showed that for, don't remember exactly the result because this was done by the group in Lyon, but they measured creatine kinase and maybe interleukin 6 but some marker of or C-reactive protein maybe, and I'm pretty sure that it was increased. It was increased less than on the long races. Like there was a greater increase in the short than in the long races, as measured in the blood. At the same time, I don't really know what is the delay between muscle damage happening in the muscle and then damage being measurable in the blood. Like I don't know, like so muscle damage as measured by creatine kinase was greater in the long races than in the short races when measuring the end, but also like from the moment that in the long races they had run 55 kilometers until the sample was taken, this was like 20 hours or 24 hours after. So there was more time for the damage to go into the bloodstream and then come to the arm where the sample was taken.
So Mike, you really speak well about all this. The thing is that I think we have to be careful when we say, okay, they feel muscle damage. They adjust to muscle damage. No, they don't adjust to muscle damage. They may have feedbacks from the muscle that they are indeed into trouble, more or less. That inflammation may be starting developing. I do believe in. But we have to be careful that people start putting those real words now to speak about it. Because otherwise they always speak about muscle damage, thinking that we feel this 10⁻⁹ damage in our sarcomeres.
Yeah, and
I think we have to be careful with this.
Yeah, I would probably agree. Like I have probably not been careful enough when using those type of words of muscle damage, but is this like, I don't know if we can really have a sensation of muscle damage. It would lead to something that would lead to something that in the end would make us feel pain or inhibit us. So probably, yeah.
Well, I think I will stop, but to stop on a positive thing. I would really like other students presenting here or those listening to take profit of this presentation you have done and the work you have been performing, because it's a great one. I hope that everybody will be rebounding the same way, moving so much in the literature to understand it and to master it. And I just hope you will make a jump to Marseille so that we can be discussing much longer, because I'm really mad to be leaving tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Fred, and Guillaume for inviting me to read this thesis and to be there today. I really enjoyed the manuscript as well, and really enjoyed the discussion, because I feel like you could be there talking all night long. And I think it's because you're passionate about the topic, and you know really what you're talking about. So this is really, I really appreciate that. And I also enjoyed that in the manuscript, because yes, the introduction is very nice and clear and detailed, but what was impressive to me was the discussion. Because usually the discussion is mostly, you know, repeating the results in a different way, or repeating the discussion part of the papers. But in your discussion, there's a clear link with practice, performance, training, and we learn a lot of new things in the discussion. And this is very interesting, because very often in a thesis, what's interesting is the introduction part only, if you want to know more about the topic. But here it's both the introduction and the discussion. So that's really good. Something that I did not enjoy much in the manuscript, that's on me. There is a huge load of spaces that should be removed. Maybe you did not notice that.
Actually, this is a weird thing, but it is when converting the Word to PDF. Like, there are no double spaces in the
Oh,
manuscript.
definitely.
It was the conversion.
Okay, so it was not this was not printed from a Word document.
No. It was printed from the
Okay.
PDF, and then
Okay,
in
so I
the
understand.
PDF like broke it, and
Perfect.
yeah, like
Because sometimes
I
within a
realized.
single word you have some space.
Yeah.
So that's because of the
Yeah,
PDF.
but
print.
Guy made me check, like,
Okay.
put space on the search bar,
Okay,
and
perfect.
it was that. Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. So maybe you should, if
Yes.
at some point you print it out again,
like print it out from the Word.
document. Yes, good. A very little detail, but it's something that we've discussed in the journal club this year. It's the study of Lemire about the importance of force is missing in the force to running economy discussion. This one is missing, and also the big review by Denadai in sports medicine is missing. So maybe you had a choice about talking only about trail running in this force to running economy relationship.
But you mean force as in strength training and
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
So exactly this. I didn't want. So I think that in the portion about training, I say that there is some relationship between like strength training has shown to improve running economy, but to me was that like actually that I think that for an endurance runner myself, I am a bit strange in that I enjoy going to the gym more than most. So I do think that it is important as in myself, and I try to like keep up with the literature as well, even if it's not my specific, because this is the training. But I think that it was that I didn't want to, like when making the choice was, will this move it too far away from trail running if I start having a discussion about strength training here? Or running economy.
Can you show us because I'm still I really agree with Gregory's point on the why do they do more trail races over a season than road races? I think there is clearly a difference. Is that basically when you can do 2 hours 20 instead of 2 hours 22, you will, you know, push your limits. But in a trail race, when you know that the next place is 5 minutes ahead, you don't care about these 2 minutes. So I think this is a big difference because you push yourself more. Can you show the two typical graphs? It's at the very beginning of the study. Can you show the two heart rate graphs over? So, because you say there's a wider bandwidth and so on, but here, first, the average. Well, it's not the two same persons and blah blah blah, but the average heart rate is clearly higher in the marathon. So of course, the average, cardiovascular effort is definitely higher. And you didn't mention some things that I'm not a specialist, but radical oxygen species and all the stuff that you generate when you do such long effort, that might play a very big difference. Have you discussed with trail runners that point. Hey guys, why do you think you can do 5 to 10 races a year instead of 2 or 3 big marathons? Have you asked them?
No, I have not, and I have not done it. Like, actually, it's a very good point that I don't think that we ever asked them, or like the coaches, because we went to the training camps and we're sitting with the coaches, and I don't really know why, and maybe it's something that we should have done.
because
Like I'm just asking them, but I think that because I'm thinking that maybe the question should be the opposite actually, because in most sports you compete much more than that. So it's like, why do the marathon runners only compete twice a year? I think that this is the real question.
So maybe
Yeah, and
Also-
absolutely. I think that it is the tradition that you think that you have to peak twice in a year, and this is the most important thing.
and maybe as simple as it seems, maybe the marathon runners will say it's pretty boring. And so I only want to do 1 or 2 big
Yeah.
ones a year, and that's it. And the other ones will say it's super fun, and I want to do as much as I can. That's another point.
Yeah. And I think that there must be a big combination of those things. But this is why I think that the socio-economical factors must be very important, although there might be something that is related to the physiology and the recovery and everything. But all of these things that are in the head of people, be it tradition or whatever, might have a bigger impact.
Okay, so one point that I want to be clear on is that the interpretation of statistical tests in your manuscripts, very often you just say these 2 variables were correlated, and that's it. And you don't have a nuance between a very high correlation and a very low correlation. Everything is always correlated. This is not the point. So maybe you should focus on being more accurate, because sometimes you have a 0.3 correlation coefficient that is interpreted about the same as a 0.8. And this is because sometimes some of your graphs show very close shapes of cloud of data, and you interpret them as very different. So
yeah, so this is a very good point actually, and I think that in part comes from I have always been a bit reluctant to those, like the measures that are somewhat arbitrary, to saying that a correlation up to here is low or moderate or good or whatever. And this is why I think that what I try to do is like put the number, so like you see the number instead of trying to say with words like, is this a strong correlation or a weak or a moderate correlation? And if you look at different people, someone say that 0.7 is this, or like the threshold is 0.7 or 0.8. So I think that I have always been hesitant, and maybe I have been too hesitant on that, because maybe I'm comparing a 0.3 and a 0.9 and treating them as equally.
And so maybe it's a bit conservative, because you rely on just saying they're correlated.
The number. And
the other point is you have exactly the same way to interpret significant differences, because in some tables you show differences and you interpret very differently differences that are actually in terms of magnitude pretty close, yet one is statistically different and the other one is not. So for example, I have in table 5, you have the total races per year between trail and road. It's 12 plus minus 4 on one side, and it's 17 plus minus 7 on the other side. It's about the same standard deviation. So it's a 30% difference, but it's not significant. And your sentence is, there is no significant difference in the total number of yearly competitions between trail and road. So it means if you read that, you say, oh, the guys that they tested did the same amount of competition, where in fact they did 30% difference.
Actually, this is a very good point, and maybe what I should have done is that they did 30% more of competitions, and that there was a 30% variability in between one another.
So the real interpretation is that there is no difference. There is that difference. And I would even say, I read some papers recently where people say, this is the difference that we find, and do your own interpretation and conclude what you want. This is good, because the interpretation should be,
this is something that I think, like, different discussion about the discussions in papers, I think. But yes, and I think, I don't know, like what Enrico will say to me, but it's this, because like for significance, I think that significance has this, that we set a threshold and it's like black or white, when it's never going to be black or white, because the significance always will come with a continuum or something.
I understand that, but if you do 12,
you're right.
That in a season with 12 and a season with 17. So I don't have many other points. The only thing is in the studies of Vernio that you show, can you show the forest plot?
Yes.
Because this forest plot is based on average values where people decrease the cost of running. Yeah. Do they mention, and so Guillaume is there as well, but do they mention the individual changes?
No, and this is something that I have always thought about this graph,
Yeah.
that it's like, would like to see the bars as well.
Is
but-
it systematic?
Yeah,
Or is
yeah.
it, the majority of the
Yeah.
athletes and maybe some of them, but on
Yeah,
average?
I don't know, and I think that even when you go into the studies, like if I remember well, because I went into the studies when I was writing the thesis to like actually check everything, that everything was correct, but I don't think that they were reporting average and standard deviation, but not individual values. They might have done it for some study. I'm not going to say that none of them did.
Yeah, because clearly if the average is -10, but half of the guys had this minus something and half of the guys or the girls had
zero?
plus something, it's
Yeah,
another information. And especially when distances are really long and there's many more factors into the game, you have to go, in my opinion, the data. Okay, and maybe the last thing is a sentence you wrote. There will be no question on force velocity profiling because it's, it's enough for this. It's enough for this year. You write, it has been shown that a running fatiguing task induced changes in step length and frequency.
I'm citing you.
Yeah, and I disagree with this sentence.
Okay, then maybe I wrote it incorrectly because like I'm probably citing you right after that.
Yeah,
right?
of course,
So,
but
yeah.
but the thing is that I disagree with this sentence because we did a study where we generated a significant amount of fatigue, decrease in MVC, and there was absolutely no change in any of the mechanical variables that you mentioned. Do you remember this study, or do you have
I
this in
don't
mind?
remember it.
It was in line with the thought of maybe they changed their running technique, not because of the fatigue itself, but because of pain. And so we wanted to induce fatigue, but not pain. So we had to, or pain, but not fatigue. So we generated a repeated sprint protocol where at the end of the sprints, the guys were really down and we tested -15% or 20% of MVC, but very same running pattern. So in this sentence, you should say either long duration or ultra endurance related fatigue, or maybe fatigue associated with damage. Because in case of very short but fatiguing tasks, and the damage, sorry, pain. Yeah, consequences of potentially consequences of damage. You see what I mean? So
yeah.
This is
I
very
think that this is a
interesting
good point that like I did not have that nuance for sure.
yeah, it is not that systematic.
Yeah. I was thinking in my head also when I was talking about the running fatiguing task, I was probably like said that this is what I'm talking about when I'm running a running fatiguing task, and because yours was absolutely like it's still a running fatiguing task, but it's probably not what I was considering for this. So yeah, I agree.
So this is the last effort between for the finish line and it's downhill. So thank you again. It was really cool, and I want to emphasize that a very big part of your work was with elite athletes. This is also a significant effort. We all know it's very different to work with this kind of people. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, JB. Okay, I guess you can relax. I may have one question, but maybe not. I'm not sure you were too stressed. Maybe you were, but you don't look.
I was very stressed before I started talking, and then after like slide 5, I was better. So that.
Okay. I obviously but sincerely wanted to thank the members of the jury to be present today. First, Fabrice and Gregory, thank you for being here. Thank you also for being members of the supervisory committee. So you follow the full PhD, and thank you for your comments during this work. Also, Caroline, thank you for being here. I know this is probably not enough neuromuscular and biomechanics for you, but still, thank you for accepting to be in this jury. And Jamie, we don't see you anymore, but for those of you who are not here this morning, so Jamie I got up at 3 a.m. and he was in his office in the middle of the night to present for the seminar this morning. So thank you again, and thank you also for all of you for your good and very nice nice question. And thank you, JB, for chairing this jury. So I guess this is my job, but also a real pleasure to give a bit of background about you. So we met in Calgary when you came to do your Master of Kinesiology that I was leading by then. And well, you probably don't know the program, but it's quite selective. I'm not saying this is not selective here, but in Calgary there were only 10 spots and many applicants, and you got one spot. I guess mostly because of your international training. So you did your Bachelor of Science in Spain, then you did an Erasmus exchange 1 year at the University of Exeter in UK. So this was not academia. You also work in California during summer. So when we received this application, and there are not that many international students, we were like, okay, so let's take him, and we never regretted to take you. You did a very good MKIN program. And during your MKIN, you actually also did 2 practicums, so one at the English Institute of Sports and another one at the Canadian Sports Institute in Calgary. So when I received this huge grant, and I was like, okay, so I know that I must mainly do clinical work, but I also want to enjoy a bit of more practical and applied science, and particularly in running. I was okay, so let's put a PhD on that. And of course, you were a perfect candidate for that. So I was very happy that you applied for this position. Again, I never regretted this choice. And yeah, if I want to be fully honest, it's not only because of your CV, but also because you're an international student and you fit it with the fact that I also want an international student in this lab. So, but the main reason why was your CV and the fact that we also knew each other. So I knew you were also a good guy. But then I felt like almost some pressure when you came in to say, okay, now Fred is here, and I know he only wants to work with athletes, and if possible, elite athletes. So it was fortunate, I would say, that we had this opportunity with Marilyn, Jamie, and Thibaut, and many others to work with the French Federation. And I think it was, I believe, I mean, I'm not saying you didn't work hard. You guys, I know you drove a lot to Portugal, as you mentioned, Auvergne, Le Lyon, etc. But I think it was also really enjoyable to do this work, particularly the discussions you had with the coach, with the trail runners, the marathon runners. So I'm very happy that you were able to do that. And then I think you also enjoyed the UTMB experience. All of us enjoyed it. It was another good one. And then we launched the training project. So it was also very applied. Try to track, follow up what the trail runners were doing during training. And then, of course, the pandemic came, and then I have to say that you were the first one back in the lab after the lockdown, because we had this study and we cannot do the training study, but let's try to study what happened to trail runners during the pandemic. So you kept recording using the app that Jan developed. But then, since we are also testing people in the lab, we asked people, the 10-20 of the trail runners, to come right after the lockdown. So I think it was the first week after or the first 2 weeks after the lockdown, and you were here first week, and you tested 20 people in 1 week.
Yeah, like Tuesday to Saturday,
yeah.
It was tested 22 people.
Yeah, 22. Unfortunately, we haven't published that yet. Hopefully we will. But yeah, just wanted to mention that you were, as during the 3 years, very motivated to come back and to cross the borders. We were not sure if it was open or closed. So it was quite stressful, I guess, for you, but you made it. So congratulations for that. That being said, when I ask you to, so very applied work, and of course, applied doesn't mean bad work. It's not the opposite. It's just different work, but it's very interesting, and I'm glad that the jury also considered it's good work. But then at some point I was like, okay, there is one project that I want to do, and it's I know it's less applied. This is something I wanted to do, and this is the study number 4 for many years. And I was okay, Fred, I would like you to do that study. And I knew this was not your favorite topic, but you well, first you didn't say no, of course, but you could have tried to say, okay, I'll do it if you ask me to do it. But I'm not a big but you never said that, so you did it, and I hope you also enjoyed that part, even so it was not as applied as the rest, with the help of Robin and Callum. Callum is here.
Thank you, Callum, because thanks to Callum, then I could get away from doing all the neuromuscular part, and I could focus
I'll talk about that in a minute. Don't worry. So yeah, thank you for that. You also were very enthusiastic about this part. So, and I think it's a nice asset to your PhD. So it's applied. Okay, good. We know that this is what you like, but this part is a bit more fundamental, if we wish, and so I think it's good. Okay, so many things I said 1 month ago about Thibaut, I think applied to you as well. So I said things like you're a hard worker. This applies to you. You always volunteer to help. This also applies to you. And you are someone we can trust. So this is also very important for a lab. At the end of the day, I think I only have 2 regrets. So the first one, you just mentioned it. I was not able to transmit my patient for neuromuscular fatigue. I don't think you know anything about neuromuscular fatigue 3 years after being in our lab.
Maybe I have
maybe a bit more.
But I still say I am no expert in neuromuscular fatigue every time.
And my second regret is that I've never been in shape to show you who is the boss in trail running. But I will at some point.
Okay. You have 8 more months.
So maybe we'll see each other in Tirange in May 2020. Anyway, I think you did a very good job today answering the questions. I was expecting that, to be honest. It was long answers, but overall, well, we'll see what the jury members will say. But very nice answers. So very good job. I want to really thank you for your excellent implication during this last 3 years. I think you can be proud of what you have done. Of course, this work doesn't come without any limitations. So some of the questions of comments today, and we knew some of those limitations, and we discovered some other limitations today. And actually, it was funny because when I was listening to you, and I think it's the 3rd or the 4th time I was listening to you, and at some point when you were discussing the fat utilization, I had the same comment as Jamie had. And I actually sent an email to myself saying, okay, we need to talk about that. And then Jamie made the same comment. So, okay, now you can ask, so why didn't you say that earlier? I don't know.
Yeah. So, like,
but I guess we're always smarter after. Anyway, so there are some limitations in any work, but overall, I think it was a very good job. So I had one question. Okay, maybe I'll ask the question. We have time. There is no way we can have a social event because of the pandemic, so we can have time to ask this question. And that was unplanned, but when Caroline started to talk about African runners, I remember that a couple of months ago I tweeted something about if, let's say, Kipchoge trained for 1 year in trail running, do you guys think that he will beat Kylian Jornet on the UTMB? I never asked you your opinion, so I want your opinion on that.
So it's a good question. It's like a very speculative question, but I would say that I don't know if a year is enough. I remember that Jim Walmsley said at some point that, and he was talking about Kipchoge specifically, like they asked the question about Kipchoge, and they said like, Yeah, like he will beat me if we run a marathon, but put him in a canyon with me and we will see who is the first one out of the canyon. And I think that Jim Walmsley in this case is right if you take Kipchoge today. But I think that your point is very important. So then like you put the artificial constraint, let's say, of 1 year. So like if is 1 year
1 or 2 years,
enough,
maybe.
but then I think that could you train Kipchoge to beat Kilian Jornet? And not knowing exactly the specifics of his physiology, because one thing that may happen is that Kipchoge specifically might be very good, might have very, very good running economy. So, and this might be more specific to running fast with better stretch shortening cycles, because this is an advantage that the canyon runners have. So, but I do think that I would not be surprised if the new wave of trail runners that are coming from Africa, be Kipchoge or someone else, would be able to beat the best runners now in trail running with experience. Because I also have to say that it is more common in North America to have track runners who were track runners in the university and very good track runners, like all-American track runners, like actually Max King, who I'm pretty sure studied then or like had something to do with both, but I'm making this up maybe. I know it's just that he worked with, that he trained with Trans Stanleyworth. Anyway, the good track runners that then go and do trail running. So these track runners that go and do trail running, they are good at trail runs in the US, but they don't win in Europe. So this might be a second thing, that they are not training enough in the mountains. So I guess it depends, because there, like I have hiked and run in the mountains in the United States. I have done it in Europe, and there is like trails in America are done for horses and mules, and they are not technical because they get sued if someone has an accident. Whereas trails in Europe, it's like, yeah, there's a trail. It's like, where is the trail? So I think that I don't know how much training and mountain experience it would require for someone like Kipchoge, who might now be too old to do this transition. But if you take Joshua Cheptegei, who has the world record in the 5 and 10K, and train him, would I be surprised if you were able, or Jacob Kiplimo, who has the, I'm pretty sure like in the half marathon, has the record in the half marathon. If you train them and they are like in their younger than 25, both of them, I think, and gave them 5 years to not only train physiologically, but also get the mountain experience and the selection of equipment, for example, things like that, like the real experience, I am pretty sure that they would be able to beat them.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I think they will not dominate as much as they do on the marathon, but they will still win, or at least be very, very competitive. But I agree that they will probably win in the end. Okay, so this will be the only question. In summary, it has been a great pleasure to work with you over the last 3 years. I hope and I trust, because of your good CV and your passion that we have seen today again, that you can find soon your dream job, which is doing with the elite athletes.
That would be
Good
great.
luck.
Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you to the members of the jury. So now we are going to discuss back with our decision. So I don't know if we go to another room. Okay, so you can stretch. Wake up if you were sleeping. Jome, you were sleeping? No? Okay, so we'll be back soon with the final decision.
I guess this means you finished, Jamie.
Did I beat everybody else back?
Yeah. Are you going to break the news to me?
Yeah. Is this a funny thing if I just tell you and then take off?
Exactly. And you go like, okay, they are here now.
You can tell them that I won.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so Fred, thank you very much for presenting today. I must say that the jury decision is absolutely unanimous, and this is why it took not very long to discuss. Basically, the jury wants to really congratulate you for the quality of the experimental content, for the quality of the manuscript, and for the quality of the presentation and the accuracy and the deep knowledge and the quality of the responses. Because you were able to cover very different topics, but every time very deep into the literature. And so it shows that you know really the topic you are talking about. So congratulations for that. And so I'm very happy to grant you the title of PhD, Doctor in Biology of Sport or in Sport Sciences of the University of Saint-Etienne, University of Lyon. And again, congratulations from the jury.
So I guess now I have to say some words. And well, thank you very much, especially first of all, thank you to the jury. As I said already, like, for some reason, I think that I have to especially thank Jamie because he has been awake since 3:30 in the morning his time. And I don't know how many hours have been since then, but yeah, thank you very much for that. I don't know if you had time to take a nap, but I hope that you did. Thank you for being part of my jury. I am sad that you couldn't come and I could meet you, but thank you anyway for coming or like for being here. I think it was, yeah, very important. It's been very important for me. Thank you very much. Now, thank you also to Fabrice and to Gregory for like coming with me during this time throughout the PhD, like being part of my comité de thèse and for the meetings and like giving me advice during all this time, and then for correcting my manuscript as well, and for being here today. Also, thank you, Colin. I didn't know you before, and it's been very nice to have you here. You have been very nice to me, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and we even got to speak some Spanish. And yeah, also thank you, Jibe, that you are here. Like you didn't have to come from very far, but thank you very much for sharing this and like, yeah, being the president of the jury and taking the time to read my presentation and to my thesis, not my presentation, and to be here today. And talking about the seniors, finally, thank you very much, Guy. Thank you for the opportunity that you gave me 3 years ago to come here to Saint-Etienne. It's been 3 years that have been great in general, a bit of a roller coaster sometimes, especially due to the pandemic. And yeah, thank you very much because I got to do work here that I would definitely not have been able to do otherwise, or like I do not know if I would have been able to keep doing science, for example. So thank you very much for the opportunity that you gave me to come here. Thank you very much for doing this with me, for putting up with me when I'm sure I did things that were wrong or that you didn't like at some points. But yeah, thank you very much and for your guidance during all this time. Then I also want to thank like my friends here in Saint-Etienne and my colleagues. So before I forget, and they left actually, at least Melanie left, but Melanie and Robin especially as master students, but yeah, you as well. Thank you very much for coming and for helping me out with the work during especially the fourth study. And then also, yeah, to the rest of my colleagues, want to give today and this week and for these last months actually, special thanks to Thibaut, because as I was super nervous thinking about my presentation and my thesis, not my thesis, but like my presentation, the PowerPoint, the presenting, like what am I going to do or say? Thibaut has been working on all of this technical stuff while I have been stealing ideas and sections of the slides from his own PhD presentation. So thank you very much, Thibaut, for that, for all your help with that. And then also thanks to, in general, like my friends and colleagues here has been great, like all of you. Jan, for your help with training, Callum, with the help with the study, and then, well, you guys know, like Jose, Kike, Giorgio, Jaume, Anders now being new, and Pedro going to Le Lioran to test the elite athletes, and Marie always being here and helping me choose the shirt for the presentation. So yeah, thank you very much to all of you for the work that we have shared and the time that we have spent together and the fun that we have had together. And now I guess that finally I want to thank my family, my mom and dad that came here. My dad drove 1,000 kilometers to come here and be here today. My mom flew. But yeah, thank you very much to both of you for being here. I will say this now in Spanish. Sinó que moltes gràcies, in Valencian actually, moltes gràcies papà i moltes gràcies mamà per vindre així i per, no sé, acompanyar-me, que sabeu que ja soc doctor. Ara ja he acabat el col·le, tindré que fer una altra cosa. Però sí, això, moltes gràcies. And she's not here, but I would also like to congratulate myself. But yeah, thank my girlfriend Alicia, who couldn't be here today, but her support has been huge during this whole time. So that's it. Thank you very much to all of you, which I could have said in just one short sentence, but you have realized today that I like talking. Yeah, so I did book the Ninkasi place for some 20 people at 7. So whoever wants to come, you're all invited. If any one of the members of the jury you want to come, we'll probably be going there, drinking something. You can eat dinner there as well, but we cannot do anything here because of the pandemic. The university does not allow it. So if you want to go there, there is no good public transport. So maybe we have to organize things with cars. So stay here for a minute and then we see who's going and who's not and things like that. So yeah, if you're going, please stay for a minute and then we'll organize that. Thank you very much to all of you.
Congrats. Have a great night. Enjoy it.